I'd like to welcome everybody to the March 19th meeting of the New Bern Board of Aldermen. And at this time, before we get going, I'd like to give an opening prayer. If you'd bow your heads, please. Heavenly Father, we just ask that today as we do the business of the city of New Bern, that we do those things that would be pleasing to you and would be in the best interest of our citizens. In your name we pray. Amen. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Bingle. Here. Alderman Harris.
Here.
Alderman Astor.
Here.
Mayor Outlaw.
Here.
Alderman Kinsey. Alderman Best.
Present.
Alderman Odom.
Okay, this time, Mr. Stevens, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. So we are here for our workshop as requested by the board. If you recall, we had some discussion regarding redevelopment and having the UNC School of Government Development Finance Initiative group come down to discuss with us some options that are available in the local government toolbox with regards to redevelopment. So that is going to be the first order of our agenda to have a discussion on redevelopment. Then we'll have kind of a Q&A session with the governing board if they want to ask any questions of the UNC School of Government folks that are here, as well as myself and the city attorney with regards to any kind of legal matters that would pertain to redevelopment. And then at that time, we'll have a discussion after the redevelopment with regards to the Marietta Park. We have some decision points that need to kind of be made, hopefully by the board or some direction by the board, so that we as staff know where to go with regards to the next phases of Marietta Park. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Marcia. Many of y'all know Marcia Parrott. She is the guru, I guess, for our development finance initiatives. Has been working with us for quite some time now here locally in New Bern, as well as across the state. She's had a lot of experience, especially in Kinston, with regards to redevelopment. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and this presentation is hers. She's got a presentation for you as well. So.
Great. Thanks, Mark, and nice to see you all. Again, I'm Marcia Parrott. I'm with the UNC School of Government out of UNC Chapel Hill. And although y'all know us, the Development Finance Initiative, because we're working with you all on the redevelopment of a couple properties in downtown New Bern, this presentation is actually pretty distinct from what we're doing. This is a presentation that I give usually a couple of these a year to local governments who are considering exploring tools like this, urban redevelopment areas. So I'm wearing a very different hat than I'm usually here. This is more kind of the educational teaching hat. To help local governments like you all consider whether a tool like this, urban redevelopment areas, is one that's appropriate for your goals for this area. So an agenda, I'm going to provide an overview of what a URA or urban redevelopment area is, what the steps are to creating a URA, what are the tools that a URA will allow, some case studies of other communities in North Carolina that have used URAs and what's happened there, the roles and responsibilities of different bodies in the URA, what a redevelopment plan entails, what the elements are, what the planning process involves, and pose some potential next steps to get the wheels turning. I'll add that a URA is definitely a process that involves a lot of legal considerations, and so this is typically part of a two-part workshop that we do. The first is a little bit more exploratory, understanding what a URA is and what the steps are to create it. But there's a second workshop that our lead faculty member, Tyler Mulligan, tends to teach as a follow-on to this one that goes through some of the legal requirements associated with the URA. I know Mark mentioned asking questions at the end. I'd actually, if you don't mind, encourage you to ask questions throughout. I think you'll see this is a lot of information that's going to come pretty fast. It's pretty detailed, so I think interrupt me whenever you like to ask questions throughout the presentation. Okay. All right, so real quick about the UNC School of Government, for those of you who might not be familiar. Oh, go ahead.
No, 1 second. Mark, is it possible to turn that blind? The reflection is really bad. I can't see the screen on that one. I apologize. The glare is just coming at me. I don't know if it's... That might just help it.
Right.
Much better.
There you
Thank
go.
you.
Now you're
Sorry.
shaded. No.
Yes, so I couldn't see the screen.
So the UNC School of Government is a department within UNC Chapel Hill. Do you have shade in your eyes too?
No, I don't hear very well.
Oh.
I wonder if there's any way to turn some of us, some of us don't hear very well.
Should I talk a little closer or go?
Yes,
There we go.
that's better.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Just wave your hand at me if I move too far away from the mic, okay? I'll tend to stray. So the School of Government is a department of UNC Chapel Hill, and it's the largest university-based local government training, advisory, and research organization in the U.S. So basically, the School of Government exists, tons of faculty, staff, lawyers that are answering questions for local government folks every day, all day. So we exist as a resource for local governments. We serve about 12,000 public officials a year through different courses, trainings like this one, publications, and we really pride ourselves on being nonpartisan, policy neutral, and responsive. So we don't advocate certain types of tools over another, but we want to give you the tools that you need to understand whether this is the best tool moving forward. Oops. There we go. Development Finance Initiative, y'all are familiar with us. That's my particular group within the UNC School of Government. We help think through real estate development and finance strategies to meet community and economic development goals. All right, urban redevelopment areas. So what is that, or a URA? It's a geographic area targeted for redevelopment by a local government. So it has to have very specific boundaries that outline its geography. And listed there on the screen, you see the state statute that outlines urban redevelopment law. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today comes directly from that state statute. So if you're interested in learning more or getting more information, I'd suggest taking note of that. Really, if you just Google urban redevelopment areas, North Carolina, this will come up. But it's about a 22-page document that, depending on who you are, will either be really interesting or put you to sleep. So, but a lot of what I'm talking about today comes straight from that. So once this urban redevelopment area is designated, it then allows for special statutory powers to attract and facilitate private investment into an area. So really the point of a URA is to lay the groundwork to allow the private sector to be more successful in redevelopment. It's a way that in areas that are suffering from some blight or distress or maybe a little bit more risky for the private sector to invest, it's a way for the local government to clear that way and help it make it more attractive. One of the first steps in creating a URA is that you must first create a redevelopment plan, and we'll talk a lot today about that plan and what are the elements that are required from that plan. And any powers or any of those tools that a local government uses must align with those objectives that are set forth in that redevelopment plan. So that's key. The redevelopment plan, a requirement of that is to get community input on what the goals and objectives should be for that urban redevelopment area. And then in turn, if the plan is successful or approved by the governing body, then any tools that are exercised have to line up with those goals and objectives. So there's a checks and balances there to make sure that the local government is using powers in a way that aligns with the goals. So what are those special tools or statutory powers that a URA allows for? And I want to emphasize as I go through these, there's no obligation for a local government to use any or all of these tools. So it's a kind of a grab bag of different tools that they have in their kit, but some local governments might choose to use one or two or all. And these are just examples of powers that they have. So one thing that's pretty powerful for a URA is that it builds consensus around vision and goals, right? That can be one reason that the private sector doesn't want to invest in an area is that there's not a clear vision. So this can help to establish a shared vision for an area. And it opens up some tools that are otherwise not available. We're going to talk more about these. And it sends a signal to the private market that local government is serious about redeveloping a particular area. One thing it does not do is it does not guarantee any federal or state funding. All right, so here are some basic steps to creating a URA. We can pause and go into any of these in more detail if you like. But the first is form a redevelopment commission, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The redevelopment commission can either be the governing body, the board of aldermen can choose to serve as the redevelopment commission, or it can be an independent board that's appointed by the board of aldermen. So two options there. Then you tentatively define the URA boundaries. So you look at a map and you draw some lines and say, this is what we think the boundaries of the URA should be. And you have to be very specific in what those boundaries are, and also have a really good rationale for why those boundaries should be that way. Because a URA can only be a URA if it meets certain qualifications. Either it's blighted or distressed, a majority of buildings are in poor condition, vacant, or abandoned, or it's in danger of becoming blighted or distressed. So those boundaries are really important, and the rationale for why you think that area qualifies as a URA is also very important.
Question.
Please.
They have to be contiguous.
They must be contiguous.
So you couldn't
Yes.
take an area here and skip over it. So it must be
Exactly. It must be contiguous. I have seen in some communities that they decide that they want to do more than one URA, maybe side by side, because those different areas have different goals. So, for example, you might have a URA for a commercial area and then a URA for a residential area adjacent to it. So if the goals are distinct enough between two areas, I'd suggest making two separate ones. But yes, must be contiguous. Don't have to be pretty or neat, right? They don't have to have a special shape, but yes, they must be
Made me
contiguous.
think of another question.
Please.
So, can you combine commercial and residential into one URA?
You
Or
can.
It doesn't
Yep.
have to be separate.
Yep, it can be a residential URA, a commercial URA, or both. It doesn't have to be separate. I would say that if the goals are pretty distinct for the commercial or residential area, then I'd recommend having two. And then the planning board has to qualify the URA, so a new body comes into play. So the Redevelopment Commission gets a map out, they draw the boundaries, and then the planning board looks at that and says, yes or no, we think that it meets the requirements for what a URA should be. And then the Board of Aldermen then passes a resolution saying, yes, we agree with the planning board's recommendation and the URA boundaries. So that's the first step, forming that redevelopment commission, coming up with those boundaries, and then the planning can begin. But you can see there are a lot of checks and balances here with different boards, the planning board, the redevelopment commission, the Board of Aldermen, to all make sure that the boundaries are accurate and that the rationale is sound for why that should be a URA. With that resolution, there is a public hearing that's required, and then you are required also to file that resolution and those boundaries with the North Carolina Secretary of State, so it's on record. Next steps is then creating a redevelopment plan, which is a pretty big step, right? This planning process can take, I've seen it take anywhere from 6 months to 3 years, depending on the size of the area and the amount of planning that's already occurred. And that process can vary a lot from community to community. And we'll talk about examples from other communities and how they've gone about creating a redevelopment plan and the ways in which they did that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. Then that plan goes through a series of approvals. Again, you see some similar things here. There's a public hearing, then it goes before the planning board, there's another public hearing, and then it goes before the Board of Aldermen. So a lot of checks and balances to approve that redevelopment plan. Then implementation can begin. All right, so here are some of the typical activities that occur when one is creating a redevelopment plan. First is review and integrate recent planning efforts. So I do understand that the area that the Board of Aldermen is considering for the URA has already perhaps been the subject of other plans, right? Maybe the Choice Neighborhood plans, the Greater Duffyfield Area plan.
Gateway Renaissance
Gateway,
plan.
that's what I'm thinking, Gateway Renaissance plan. We understand that sometimes the community can get a little bit exhausted, right, by having the same planning effort over and over again. So I think it's important to look at those past plans and integrate those findings into your redevelopment plan.
Is it possible just to use the CNI, since there was a lot of time, a lot of money put into that, and therefore it's a relatively recent document, as recent goes, and could that be the basis of it? We wouldn't have to do a new plan, is that correct?
You'd still have to create a redevelopment plan that's specific for the URA, but I think absolutely, because the CNI plan is so recent, and so long as the community feels that, yes, it's still representative of what our goals and our objectives are, then absolutely, use that as the basis moving forward. You still would need a separate redevelopment plan that's specific for that area, but it can pull on elements from the CNI plan.
Well, just curious, because the CNI plan defines the area.
Right. Yeah.
I would
yeah.
hate, it's just, we spend so much money on plans time after time. Hate to reinvent the wheel.
Absolutely. I think so long as the public agrees that plan is still representative, then I think that it creates a lot of efficiency, and you don't exhaust the public from asking the same questions over and over again. Absolutely. You'll see that there are some elements of a redevelopment plan that are required by state statute. So the thing perhaps I would start with is looking at that CNI plan and seeing what's missing here that needs to be in the redevelopment plan as per state statute. So that might be one of the first activities is putting those side by side. And we'll go through those required elements of the plan. Other activities, and I think a lot of this already happened with CNI, is data collection, right? Looking at existing conditions, land use, ownership, vacancy, looking at development activity, code enforcement, crime, making maps that help to understand those patterns. Again, you might already have this through CNI. Perhaps doing a community needs assessment or survey. Yep, that was part of CNI. Engaging with property owners and residents. Doing market analysis, residential and commercial. Doing a design charrette, so getting folks together around a map and thinking through where specific types of development should go. Creating conceptual renderings, site plans. Doing a financial feasibility analysis, a very important component. Figuring out, does what we're proposing here, what's the scale of public investment required? Are we proposing something that's attractive to the private sector? Very important component for the future success of the plan. And of course, community meetings around the vision and the goals of the plan are another essential element. Do you think that many of these things are already represented within the CNI plan?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yep. Yeah. A few things that I probably would update would be the market analyses, just to check and make sure, right, because market information can change, as does ownership and existing conditions can change pretty quickly. And I think having another check-in with the public and property owners to make sure that the goals are... So yes, I think you could skip a lot of this and use that as the basis and build on it. Yep. All right, so I've mentioned a lot of different groups. The Redevelopment Commission, the Planning Board, the public, the Board of Aldermen. So I'm going to pause here and go through each of their roles and responsibilities. So first is the Redevelopment Commission, which, as I said, it could be the Board of Aldermen or it could be an independent Redevelopment Commission appointed by the board. That Redevelopment Commission is charged with recommending the boundaries and the qualifications, why this area qualifies as a URA. They're also the body who's responsible for creating that plan, that redevelopment plan. And then they're also responsible for really the most important part, which is implementing the plan, doing those actions. The Planning Board is who qualifies the URA, who double checks that the boundaries and the rationale that the Redevelopment Commission has put forward is correct and that they agree. And they submit those recommendations to the Board of Aldermen for approval. The public is an essential element in creating a redevelopment plan. The public is who identifies the needs, sets the vision and the goals. They're providing support. They're also holding the Redevelopment Commission accountable for implementation throughout the stage, so it plays a really important role. And the Board of Aldermen passes the resolution certifying the URA, builds consensus, provides input, holds the public hearings, and approves that final plan. I'll also add that the Board of Aldermen is also responsible for if the Redevelopment Commission acquires and chooses to sell or convey any property, that the Board of Aldermen gives that final approval for any sale or conveyance of property.
Question. Can you provide us with a hard copy of your presentation?
Absolutely.
This is a lot of information.
I know. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I will. I'll give you all 40 slides. Yeah.
That is available on, we can have available for the public.
Sure, absolutely. Yep.
Question.
Yes.
Nowhere on this do I see the role of our public housing authority or Section 8 vendor. How does that work and fit in? I know that the statute says there are 3 ways to look at public housing. Number 1 would be for the Board of Aldermen, just as you're saying, to be that. Number 2, have a separate independent public housing. And then 3rd would be a redevelopment commission. So how does that statute and this kind of work together?
Yeah, I mean,
or does it?
They complement each other, but they are distinct authorities, a public housing authority and a redevelopment commission. But I think in order for a URA to be successful, they should probably have some overlap, right? Perhaps if you have an independent redevelopment commission, then you want at least one of those members to be a representative of the housing authority, for example. I'd also consider them part of the public or a key stakeholder that's giving input into the vision of the plan, but those are distinct authorities, a public housing authority and a redevelopment authority.
But based on the statute,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you choose one of the above when you're starting, based on how the statute reads. One, either the city has a department,
Mm-hmm.
it's independent, or it's part of a redevelopment commission. So that's where I'm confused in that. How do you then integrate that? Would the housing then be part of the redevelopment? Because if we choose now to have a redevelopment commission, I'm a little bit confused.
I might lean
That
on
may
my
be a legal
attorney.
question
Yep.
for you, Mr. Davis. You remember when we went through that whole process of the three choices that we had as far as setting that up, and a long time ago they chose to have independent public housing. I was unsure how that would fit with a redevelopment commission, because if we choose now to do a redevelopment commission, where does that fit in?
Yes, ma'am. My recollection of the statute is that the housing authority can remain independent with that new commission, or they can be combined under the statute into
Under the
one.
statute.
Right. I
So
won't
you don't
add to
have
the
one or
attorney.
the other.
Right, exactly. One, they can coexist.
Okay.
Right.
Thank
One
you.
does not replace the other. All right, so a little bit more about that redevelopment commission that you've heard me referring to, which sounds like they have a pretty big job, and they do, right? The redevelopment commission is creating the plan, they're implementing the plan, so it is something to be very mindful of, starting out what that redevelopment commission looks like. So there are essentially two options. The governing body, the Board of Aldermen, may choose to act as the redevelopment commission, or it can be an independent commission appointed by the Board of Aldermen. I'll say that I've seen communities do a mix of the two. I think the independent board, in my review of case studies, tends to be a little bit more successful because it's not, one is busy. The Board of Aldermen already have pretty big jobs. They have a lot to do, and so it lets them to be nimble and focused on just this activity. Allows for a little bit more kind of less beholden to the political process, right? It can act independently, but you can do either or. Some communities, for efficiency, it makes more sense for the Board of Aldermen to be the redevelopment commissions. Others think that it's better to have an independent board. So something that you'll want to wrestle with early on is whether or not the Board of Aldermen should be the redevelopment commission, or should there be an independent board. I'll say even if the redevelopment commission is independent of the Board of Aldermen, there still is checks and balances that the Board of Aldermen is going behind them and checking their decisions and reviewing their recommendations.
If you went with independent, can anyone on the Board of Aldermen serve on that commission?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah. I would recommend having at least one representative from the Board of Aldermen on that redevelopment commission. A little bit about that makeup. It can have as few as 5, but no more than 9 members. All of those members must be city residents, and the Board of Aldermen will establish the terms for those members. It can be no less than 1, but no more than 5-year terms. Redevelopment Commission members can own property within the URA, because this sometimes can happen naturally, right? The folks that, let's say it's an independent redevelopment commission, you might find that the people who own property there are the ones who are most interested in its success. But they must disclose that in writing, and if there's any decisions that would affect their interest in their property, they would have to abstain from voting on those decisions. The commission members, though, can't have an interest, direct or indirect, in any development projects or properties in the URA unless they've disclosed it in writing and they're not set to benefit directly or indirectly from the redevelopment plan. And they can't be in contracts for materials or services. So, for example, they can't be the contractor that the Redevelopment Commission hires to do demolition. Can't be a commission member. Or be part of the redevelopment team, the eventual redevelopers. So pretty obvious, but worth stating. One exception is if it's their primary residence. If it's owner-occupied residence, then that can be hard to avoid, but they still have to disclose all those things in writing.
So a stakeholder, literally, then somebody
Right.
who lives in that neighborhood.
Who lives in
can
the
be part
neighborhood.
of it.
Yep. All right, so what are some of these tools? I've been alluding to this special toolkit and statutory powers that are opened up by the urban redevelopment area. So I'm going to go into some of these tools that are available once a URA is designated. And again, not required to use all these tools, 10 of these tools. You can use as few as one. Sometimes I've seen in some local governments just the act of creating the redevelopment plan is enough to catalyze private investment that they don't end up using very many of these tools at all, if none. But I'll go through these. Again, I've talked about this. It builds consensus. That shared vision gets public input. And it allows the Redevelopment Commission to, one, acquire parcels outright through conventional means, but they can also acquire parcels by eminent domain, but only for blighted parcels. So there are very few instances in North Carolina when a governing body can acquire parcels by eminent domain, and this is one of those very few cases, if it's in a URA and if it's blighted. So 2 requirements. Not a tool that I see used very frequently. The E word is not one that's pretty welcome, but it is a tool that's available. Some situations where I've seen that this tool can be helpful is with heirs properties. If y'all are familiar with heirs properties, somebody passes away, the property is owned by their 30 relatives. It's very difficult to do the transaction any other way but for through eminent domain. So that can be an example where eminent domain can be helpful. The Redevelopment Commission is also able to clear areas by demolition or building removal, to make site improvements, so put in infrastructure, prepare the site for redevelopment, and enter into contracts for construction, demolition, and repairs. Other tools, they can engage in programs of assistance and financing, provide loans. And the key here is irrespective of job creation. In North Carolina, there's a lot of strict laws about when a local government can provide financing, loans to private investors. Usually there's a job creation requirement, so it really restricts the use of loans. But in the case of a URA, you are able to provide loans and financing without consideration of job creation. So that, I'll say, is a pretty popular tool that the URA provides.
I think I need a little bit more in-depth on what you're saying. So you're saying that this Redevelopment Commission, if they access funds either through dollars or grants or whatever, then they can act as a finance agency and loan money to people in that area, or developers, investors, right, whatever.
Exactly. They could be loans or grants for home rehab, weatherization, so it could be at a small scale for individual homeowners or property owners, or it could be a loan to a private developer.
Okay, so how does this then work with the CDBG? So let's say the city gets a CDBG grant. Does that then, particularly for, and right now our CDBGs would be in that area, for that area, that would then go into the redevelopment, this URA, and then they would use that, or it would still have to be administered with the same rules, is that correct?
Right. The CDBG rules will supersede any URA rules.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that would have to do that. Now, somebody like the North Carolina Financing Agency, would they have a role in this? Could they be brought in? So anybody could be brought into this?
Yep. But I imagine whatever those program requirements are for the Housing Finance Agency or CDBG, those requirements have to supersede anything you would do with the URA. Yep. But let's say, the Redevelopment Commission sells property and has a fund balance. They could choose to make loans with that fund balance. Yep.
Okay, yeah, my question was, if we were to build a house, would we be able to sell it to the homeowner and provide that loan? Wow. Okay.
So here's some examples. Make loans for infill redevelopment, provide matching grants for rehab, so it does open up a lot of possibilities that otherwise wouldn't be available for the public sector to partner with the private sector in a URA. If a redevelopment commission acquires property and has to sell that property, they still have to follow competitive bidding procedures. Those don't go away.
Can they restrict what happens on that property?
Great question. That's coming. Yes,
okay.
They can restrict what happens with that property. So that's I think probably to me the most exciting tool of a URA is restricting what happens with that property to make sure that for a period of time or however the Redevelopment Commission feels is necessary, that property has to continue to meet those community goals.
Okay, so one step backwards to another question that came to my mind. The reason we would have a redevelopment commission versus the city just doing it, not a redevelopment, but the city, is that we can't, provide matching grants and make loans. So that's the reason for doing that. Gives more tools that the city as a body cannot do itself.
Exactly.
Okay,
You would
so
not be able to do
clarify
these
that.
if it were not in a URA.
We can't restrict what can be done in law.
You also can't put restrictive covenants unless
Right,
it's in a
understood.
URA. Yep, yeah. Really, ultimately, the goal of these tools is to benefit the private sector, to allow for more flexibility and investment, but they are tools that the public sector can use. So again, the Redevelopment Commission has to sell through competitive bidding, so anyone can bid. So for example, the commission acquires a blighted parcel, and it sells it to a private developer through competitive bidding. And that means that the bidding is open, anyone can bid, the sale price is known. You can't do sweetheart deals. Not that you would anyway, but it is something important worth noting. Another thing that the Redevelopment Commission can do, we've been talking about it, is encumber parcels with covenants to uphold redevelopment goals. So put restrictions on what happens with the future of that property. So, for example, if a goal of the URA is to increase home ownership, you can say, we're selling this home, but it has to remain owner-occupied for 10 years.
Kind of like FHA. Kind of like FHA.
Kind of like FHA,
Okay.
exactly.
Would it also cover rehabilitation? So there's many homes in the area that people would say are blighted. It's because no one wants to invest the money in them to rehab them, but they probably have pretty good bones. They just, people don't have the funds. But would this apply as well for rehab versus, new building?
Absolutely,
So
any
it all
kind of
works the
property.
same. Okay, so you could restrict, if somebody bought that property through competitive bidding, the commission could then say, yes, you can buy this, but you must invest the money and fix it up. You can't tear it down. What happens?
Exactly. You could
Okay.
say you must invest the money, it must be owner-occupied, and you must do the rehab within 2 years. So you can put those kinds of requirements to make sure. I think sometimes in areas where URAs are needed is because there's some problem property issues, right? Abandonment or people sitting on properties for too long. So this provides some tools to make sure that folks are motivated. And it narrows that competitive bidding, right? If folks know that, okay, if I buy this property, I've got to live in it, I've got to rehab it within 2 years, and I can't tear it down, well, that's going to change the pool of people who are going to bid on that property, right? So it helps to put protections to make sure that anything that happens is in alignment with those goals that the public has endorsed, that the board has endorsed. Examples here: sell blighted residential property via competitive bidding and require it to be rehabilitated within 5 years, or offer a matching grant for infill construction and say that the property has to be owner-occupied for 10 years. So just 2 examples. Anything you see in italics is just an example of how you might exercise that tool. And again, the tool that the URA provides is sending that signal to the private sector that the local government is serious about redevelopment and serious about partnering with the private sector. Am I doing okay with sound volume? Okay, good. All right, so again, things that a URA does not do, does not guarantee any state or federal funding, although I will say having a plan like this, or really the CNI plan, builds a strong case to show also to funding agencies that you're serious about a redevelopment plan. So it can't hurt, but it does not guarantee any funding. It does not allow for private sale with non-monetary consideration. So you can't do a private sale, a sale between an owner. It has to be competitive bidding, and it has to be for fair market value. 2 exceptions. One is in a community development area, and I'll defer to my attorney here to talk about how a community development area is defined, but it can't be at a price for no less than appraised value, or if it's for a public purpose. And I'm sure y'all are familiar with this. Local governments do have some statutory authority to do a private direct sale so long as the ultimate purpose will be low or moderate income housing, affordable housing. So there's some flexibility if it's for a public purpose. Additional considerations, again, Any of these tools have to be exercised in a way that aligns with the vision and the goals and the standards in the plan. So the plan is really where the accountability is. That's where you want to be paying close attention, members of the public, is the goals that are set forth in that plan, because any tools have to be utilized in a way that aligns with those. And every community is different, right? The goals and objectives could be different from place to place. All right. I was going to move into case studies. Do we have questions about
I have
tools?
one question
Please.
before you move forward. With the Redevelopment Commission, any parcels that are city-owned parcels would basically fall up under the same rules and everything as private property, or?
Only if they were conveyed to the Redevelopment Commission. So you can only put deed restrictions on properties that are under site control of the Redevelopment Commission. So if the city wanted those properties to have similar restrictions, they would need to convey those to the Redevelopment Commission.
But when you convey, that's only property, I mean, just because a house is in this neighborhood or this area, it doesn't convey, it's not part of the
No.
properties that we're selling, it's just
Nope.
properties that are either we already own properties.
Exactly, that you already own or that you set out to acquire. Right. You don't, the Redevelopment Commission does not get to do these things for privately owned properties.
One thing I want to add real quick is, and Scott kind of leaned over and mentioned it to me, but appreciate the fact that Commissioner Sampson is here, because many of the lots that we own are jointly owned by the county and the city. So we obviously, if we go down this route, we're going to need to get the county involved, because they will have to convey their interest as well. So there's a lot of properties that are owned by both the city and the county.
I also just misspoke. I said that these tools can only be used for properties that are owned by the Redevelopment Commission. Not necessarily true in the case of financing, right? The Redevelopment Commission can make loans or grants to privately owned properties. But you cannot encumber the deeds, put restrictive covenants, or sell properties that you don't own,
Within the plan of the URA.
that are within the boundaries of the URA.
Okay, so if I didn't live in the 5 Points area, I couldn't come to the URA and say, hey, can you give me some money to rehab my house?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Move on to case studies. Okay. All right, I'm going to start with Kinston, North Carolina, right down the road. This is a largely residential urban redevelopment area. It's a historic neighborhood that's adjacent to downtown. Issues there were a lot of blighted parcels at the time. 1 in 4 parcels were vacant, abandoned. Lots of issues with heirs properties. So even if some of the heirs wanted to sell a property, it was too tough to get all the heirs on board, or to even identify all of the heirs. So some issues in getting properties into redevelopment there. Some issues around perceived safety, and a lot of code enforcement issues there as well. Lots of frustration, as you might imagine, from the city and among residents.
Excuse me.
Yes.
But didn't you say that's where the eminent domain could come in?
Exactly. That's where eminent domain can be useful. Because with eminent domain, the property owner still gets fair market value for the property, but it helps to clear the title and extinguish some of those issues with heir properties, that even if the heirs were willing to sell, if for some reason or another the title was sticky or clean and was or maybe the legal costs of selling the property were more than the value of the property, eminent domain could be a useful tool there, in that it will still get the owner's fair market value for their property, but helps to clean up the title so that the next person can redevelop it.
So then you'll be dealing with all the heirs of that property? Is
Right.
that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So we would
I'm
have
going to
to.
look at the attorney.
Okay.
I shouldn't go too far down this road, but
Many times, just to kind of give you for an example here, we have multiple properties that the city and the county own, and the county some time ago did a contract for an attorney to go through, and the foreclosure processes on a lot of these properties. What happens is on these heir properties, it gets so far down the line that it's almost impossible to find all the heirs and notify them properly based on what the state law requires. So it stays tied up in this notification time for a long time. We have some that have been since probably 2000, 2002, something like that. I mean, long time, maybe some of the late 90s, that these have been tied up in this process. So ultimately, the process that you have here through the eminent domain process is an opportunity for you to acquire these properties without having necessarily to go through this exhaustive search of heirs to notify them properly based on state law.
And generally a last resort or a tool that you don't see used very frequently, but it is a tool that's available in some extreme cases.
Okay, I think we're going to run into that right much. So give me a cursory on that real quick, the procedure on that, Mr. Stevens or Mr. Davis. I'm sure we'll be using that tool quite a bit, as you well know. So could you give us a quick cursory on that?
On the condemnation?
The procedure?
On the condemnation, Mayor?
Yes. I mean, you know, some of these we've had for years.
Yes, sir. I'm not sure that's going to be a great tool for us.
You put a bond up or something, or
Yes,
for the
sir.
tax value of the property, or how do you do that?
Yes, sir. Title works the same. The real problem with heir property is identifying heirs. The law requires us not to take a cursory look, but to make a very reasonable effort to locate all the heirs. And in many cases, I've got pending, we have 40, 50, 60 identified heirs living all over the country and the world. And if we can't find a good service address, we have to publish a notice in the paper. So if we have someone living in Brooklyn, for example, we'll spend $1,000 to get that notice in the New York City paper for just one of the maybe 40 heirs. The rules on condemnation are not much different. We still got to identify the owners, notify them of the claim. And the tricky part there, too, is in a tax foreclosure, the city is owed money that it's for back taxes and typically for demolitions. We might be owed $5,000 or $10,000. In a condemnation, we do all that same legal work. Then we have to hire an appraiser and pay fair market value for the property that the owners owe us money for. So it's not a silver bullet. It's another tool, and there may be a little movement around the edges as to how we identify and notice people, but it's not a shortcut to the process.
I didn't mean to belabor that other than the point. I think a lot of what the Redevelopment Commission we're trying to expedite some things that between the gridlock with the attorney that we've had in the past and
Yes,
other
sir.
things that we can expedite this. And
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Stevens, what I heard Mr. Stevens say and what you're saying are
Two different things.
not the same.
Well, let me put it in perspective. I thought you asked me about the tougher questions.
Well, I'm going to cut it to chase. If you were to tax value on a piece of property is $4,000 and you post a $4,000 bond,
We write a check and we pay it to the clerk, and that money gets distributed to the heirs. So we don't post a bond, we pay it, we buy it.
okay,
Yes.
you do that?
Yes, sir. After we go through all the legal steps.
Well, I mean, that would be cheaper than the 10. We got one that is not worth $1,500 and we're fixed to spend $10,000 on legal fees for.
Yes, sir. You'll spend the same thing in a condemnation. It's not a matter of
Right.
cutting a check for $4,000 and saying we're done. I do all the same legal work, just through a different statute.
Marcia, do we have examples from Kinston or whatever? Maybe we can talk to them, because obviously they're using it, Wilson's using it, Greenville used it. I read last night online where the cities are using it to solve the problem, like the mayor was just talking about, of all these heirs. So obviously they've not found a golden bullet,
Sure.
but they have a process that we might be able to use that may be
Certainly.
easier, so maybe we could get with them to find out what they're using.
Certainly.
Is that correct, that they're using that pretty much? That's a tool they're using?
I think they experience similar challenges, though, in terms of legal fees, that these can be costly endeavors. I'm not an attorney, so I won't speak to how eminent domain might shorten that or make it more efficient.
Well, and again, I also make all those phone calls. We do a lot of condemnations for the city, and the statute's the statute. Let's put this in perspective first, though. We're talking about less than 1 out of 100 properties that we deal with, so we don't have dozens and dozens of these problem cases. I've got 2 or 3 out of hundreds that are particularly challenging. So the bulk of these get taken care of through tax foreclosures. The condemnation is an issue where it may be heir property, but granny's living there and she's paying her taxes and there's no money due. So there's no basis to even do a tax foreclosure. but the house is falling down and Granny doesn't own the entire property to sell it to anyone. So that's where condemnation can come in, buy the property, cure all the heir issues, and get the property. We tend to use the tax foreclosure process because we do in fact have monies owed. But the procedures are largely the same, just different tool for a different set of facts.
Right.
So, Marcia, then, if these properties were put into the Redevelopment Commission, then could the redevelopment funds pay all these legal fees and pay all the necessary fees for eminent domain or whatever? Is that
Certainly.
correct?
I mean, the Redevelopment Commission will come up with a budget of how they'd like to allocate their funds. So, yes, at their discretion, so long as, again, it's in line with the goals set forth in the plan.
The reason why I brought up the eminent domain again is for those of you that sit in the audience, you may be one of a family of heirs. So I wanted you to get a little bit better understanding of how the eminent domain would take effect towards your property. So that's why I brought that up a little bit. I want a little bit more clarification for you to understand.
I'll add that I've seen in other redevelopment areas something that comes out of a plan like this might be a need to help communities with more estate planning, right? Doing legal clinics to help people with estate planning. So I think certainly that could be something if heirs are an issue or you want to prevent that moving forward, then there are incredible resources with UNC School of Law and Legal Aid partnering together. I'm helping to organize 2 estate planning clinics in Rocky Mount and Kinston for the fall. So might be something that you consider is getting ahead of this and helping to make sure community members have the legal resources they need to do estate planning to avoid these types of issues. All right, so in Kinston, issue with this mill neighborhood downtown, lots of vacancy, lots of abandoned parcels, blighted homes, but some momentum with downtown revitalization and the African American Music Trail. And there was some interest in putting artists into some of these vacant homes. But the city didn't have a lot of financial means to be able to do public investment. They were pretty limited. So they established an urban redevelopment area. They did an inventory of all their parcels, collected a lot of data, researched best practices, established a zoning overlay to allow for artists to live and work in these homes, did a community survey by mail, and also held 3 community meetings at a neighborhood church. URA plan was approved with the goal of getting these vacant homes occupied by whatever means necessary, and implementation is now underway. This was established in 2013, and there's been about 60 homes that have been rehabilitated in this area since then. So pretty dramatic. One way that the public sector did partner with the private sector in this way was to do more targeted code enforcement. It can be tough. Code enforcement resources can be spread pretty thin, but having a URA can help provide that coverage so that you can do more targeted code enforcement in certain areas. The city also invested in public infrastructure. They helped to improve the sidewalks, put in new street lights, put in a river walk through this neighborhood. So that's the way that in this case, the public sector used that URA to make investments that made it more attractive for the private sector to step up.
I have a question.
Please.
A lot of the properties that's actually being taken care of, it's mainly coming from private partnership.
Yep.
Because the city is not able to do anything to come in to assist anything, but you said they would do sidewalks and that sort of thing there.
Yep. The city is doing more of the public infrastructure, the sidewalks, the street lights, the greenway, but it's private sector partners who are taking the lead. And the URA in Kinston, I think what was really key about it was showing that the local government was serious about supporting private investment, and it helped to build that confidence for private investors to step in.
How many cities actually have come up with the private partnership that you guys have worked with? Do you know how many?
Ooh,
do you have
I don't have a number off the top of my head. I'll say the URA was a pretty popular tool in the 1960s and 70s, and then it kind of diminished in popularity, and it's resurging. But thinking of towns out in eastern North Carolina, I know Greenville, Wilson, Rocky Mount, and Kinston are all communities that have successfully used the URA tool to help revitalize distressed areas.
Redevelopment commissions. They've all
Redevelopment
engaged
commissions.
redevelopment commissions.
Exactly. Yep. If you search, earlier I talked about how you have to file a resolution on the Secretary of State website that you're a redevelopment commission. If you search redevelopment commission on there, you'll see a lot of redevelopment commissions all over the state, but it doesn't mean they're all necessarily active. Sometimes when you pull up those resolutions, they're from 1974.
Another question is on studies. How many studies that you know of that has been done and not actually acted on the studies that they actually spent the money on? Do you have a number on?
You mean like how many studies actually get implemented and how many sit on the
Yes.
shelf?
Yeah.
For URAs? Well, I'll say with the URA,
Let's use New Bern. How many studies have we done with
Oh,
you guys, and how many we have not responded
we haven't done
to?
any studies with you yet. Yeah.
None? Okay.
None. No.
I'm just
Yeah.
asking questions.
Yeah. No. We'll help with this though if you'd like.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay, very
absolutely. I'll say that, but that sometimes can be an issue. So we talked about that earlier, that if you're going to engage in a URA, that you want to look at prior planning efforts because the community gets exhausted by being overstudied. They want action and implementation. They don't want studies. So with the URA, I would recommend looking to the CNI study, the Gateway Renaissance Plan, using what you've already have rather than reinventing the wheel, I think will be really important. With URAs, I think these tend to be redevelopment plans that do become very action-oriented and implemented because it is a process, right? Why go through the pain of having all these public hearings and forming a redevelopment commission and passing resolutions if you're not going to take action? All right, so another example, this is for a commercial area in Rocky Mount, the Douglas Block. This is a 6-block area, if y'all are familiar with Rocky Mount. A gorgeous downtown, but a lot of vacancy and distress. And folks there felt that the downtown was in need of some sort of transformative project that could jumpstart redevelopment. The Douglas Block was a historic African-American business district in a very prominent location, but had a lot of blight and vacancy, but some gorgeous buildings that were very important in terms of the history and culture of that city. It was actually a CDC, the Rocky Mount Edgecombe CDC, that led that effort in partnership with the city. And actually how the basis for this project was an oral history project. So helping to hear stories and collect stories from the elders of how this area had prominence early on. And this actually provided the basis for revitalizing this area because of its historical and cultural significance.
I've seen it. It was a meeting that I attended there, and that same building that you're showing there
In the
has
Booker
been
T.
turned
Theater?
around. Yes,
Yeah,
it's
it's
really
beautiful,
nice.
isn't it? Yep,
It's really
yep.
nice. They've done a good job there.
Yep.
But that come with private partnership
Exactly.
coming in to move forward with that projects
Exactly.
like that.
Yep. So this is about, if you've been to this, it's a large block with a collection of historic buildings. It's a 6-block area, and it was very much, as you said, a public-private partnership.
Right.
Most of the buildings in that block are privately owned or managed by that CDC. The city actually does own the Booker T. Theater, so they manage that theater as part of their Parks and Recreation Department. So it's a great example of a public-private partnership, absolutely.
Excuse me.
Yes.
But didn't you say historical?
Yes, ma'am.
Historical area. So I know you said that you probably can't get very much state or federal money, but since it's a historical area, you still can't receive?
Great point, yes. So in this case, historic tax credits were a very important source of financing for this project. So yes, that is a federal and state funding. It wasn't the URA tool that opened them up for historic tax credits, though. It was the historic designation of the properties themselves.
Exactly.
So it might be, let's say, if the area that's the focus for the New Bern URA has a collection of historic buildings that we find when we're doing our financial feasibility, hey, the redevelopment potential of these buildings isn't possible without historic tax credits, and there isn't a historic district, or these buildings aren't on the National Register, that might be something we consider as the first step, is that we want to get these buildings on the National Register. We want the city to be supportive of that so that we open up the eligibility for historic tax credits.
So the tool in the toolbox on the public side would be looking at the district to see if you can formulate a designee or a tax credit district.
Exactly.
Then the tool in the private toolbox would be the tax credits.
Exactly. That's something that Kinston is doing right now.
Correct.
Is the feedback they're getting from private investors is, hey, we'd love to do projects here, but these buildings aren't on the National Register. They're not eligible for tax credits, and we need that tool. But we don't want to spend the 12 months of hiring a consultant to put together that plan. So that's the way Kinston's partnering.
Well, we already have an excellent example of that in Craven Terrace. Craven Terrace would not have been able to be renovated had it not been for the 40%. They got a 20% state, 20% federal tax credit, so that enabled the investor to redevelop that property because of the tax credits.
Yep, we find that many of these historic projects aren't possible without that use of that tool.
Now, is this on the commercial side? Because I feel like, I don't know if it is deemed, but I know that like the greater Duffield area, I know they may be working on it now or have been working on it a long time to be deemed as historical.
It could be for commercial or residential properties.
Well, that's residential, so will that affect if the board decides to do a URA, if the land in that area is deemed historic in regards to how you build up or change? Because I know in some areas you have a home that's deemed historic, you can only do certain things, certain type of paint, things you can't do inside or outside.
Right. I'm going to look at the attorney, but I think it depends on what type of historic district it is.
Correct.
If it's a local historic district, then there tends to be a lot more of those restrictions, like you're talking about what the fence looks like and the paint color. If it's a national district or if it's individually listed, then there's a little bit more flexibility.
What would, just say a home over in the Duffield area, what age bracket are you looking at for it to be considered part of?
50 years or older.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're seeing a lot of 1960s renovations now
Right.
using tax credits as they become eligible. Yeah.
I think there is a cutoff date, though. I think maybe it's 64. I'm talking to John Woods,
Oh, okay.
or it might even be 58 or 59. They're coming back where they're cutting
They're
off because of the
starting to cut.
architectural style.
I see, yeah.
Something
My
to
understanding
look
was
into.
50 years, but there might be new exceptions. I am by no means a historic expert, just know enough to be dangerous, but not an expert. Yeah.
In Rocky Mountain, how many of the owners kept their property during the redevelopment of the URA?
I think that none of the original owners kept their property. They were all acquired by the Redevelopment Commission and then put into private ownership because the owners weren't interested in redeveloping them. Yeah. Or it might be, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm looking at Ashley, our colleague, because she's from Rocky Mount. She might remember the story better. But I think that the CDC first strategically acquired those properties, and then the URA was the tool to help them redevelop those properties.
Okay. So if we did commercial, hypothetically speaking, there's Broad Street, and there's a block that is prominent within the same historic area where maybe, we can go in and help the individual that owns that property to build it up so that it's enticing for business owners to come in, and he or she, the owner, would still own the property.
Yeah.
Is that a tool that could be in the URA if we did a commercial and residential?
Absolutely. You do not have to own these properties in order to exercise some of those tools. So, for example, that financing, the loans or grants, those can be, private properties can be eligible for those types of loans or grants or incentives.
Okay, and if we did that, would we put stipulations on who can borrow the money based on credit?
You'd want to make some decisions about what your eligibility requirements would be. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely, because I'm assuming you're not going to have unlimited resources to be
Right.
able to partner, right? So you're
Right.
going to want to be strategic and making sure that you're partnering effectively and you're getting the most leverage out of your investment as well.
Correct.
And Rocky Mount, again, as I said, oral history was a really important part of establishing the vision for the URA. A lot of public design charrettes, meetings. They did an environmental assessment. There were some brownfields issues with these properties. They created a financial pro forma and a complete program for the properties. They engaged partners like Parks and Recreation to help maintain the Booker T. Theater. Here we go. The city acquired the parcels and then conveyed them to the CDC. And it ended up being an $8 million redevelopment project financed through historic tax credits, new market tax credits, a HUD loan, as well as public investment in the infrastructure. So it's a different example because it's very much a contained, if you imagine, it's one city block, so it was a pretty small urban redevelopment area relative to a larger residential area. But URAs can be as big or small as you like. The city's contribution to date at this time was about $500,000, so pretty great leverage, right? $500,000 in public investment, leveraged about $8 million in private investment. So pretty good return. 6 buildings total, 25,000 square feet for commercial tenants. The rate was $10 a square foot, which was high for Rocky Mount at that time for commercial buildings. And it also included market rate apartments, which was pretty exciting. At that time, there was no market rate residential in downtown Rocky Mount, so this was a really important outcome for their URA. A couple other case studies, I'm just going to whiz through these. Mooresville, this is out in western North Carolina, outside of Charlotte. They used a URA for a historic yet declining downtown neighborhood. Their goal there was really home ownership. They purchased and rehabbed homes and then sold them for first-time home buyers with restrictions that they remain owner-occupied. A CDC was a big partner there. Greenville did a URA for a neighborhood that is adjacent to their downtown. They provided small business assistance, did a lot of signage and wayfinding, and built a community center through their URA. And Sanford used a URA to turn an old railroad depot right in the center of their downtown into an urban park and museum. So you can see there's a lot of different ways that one might use a URA. All right, questions about case studies before I go through the required elements of a URA plan?
I think the main thing, and I want my alderman to help clarify this. Probably back in the 60s, the urban renewal and revenue sharing of the 60s and 70s resulted in the downtown area that was redeveloped, where your model was total demolition of all the buildings with the exception of the Harvey Mansion and maybe one other parcel. I don't think we're necessarily looking at that type of a model here. We're looking at a model to facilitate and bring together holistically various groups that have different ideas about how to make it happen. Right. That it hasn't happened, and part of that is this redevelopment commission with those tools. I don't think it's about going into any area of town and totally doing what happened downtown, because that's what was happening. That was vogue during the 60s and 70s. So when that, as I recall, revenue sharing source of funds, and that was part of the reason why many cities went in and did redevelopment. I think Beaufort, as an example, if you went to Beaufort, you would have seen a very blighted waterfront area. I think once that revenue sharing federal model was depleted or whatever, or terminated, that's when you stop seeing redevelopment commissions. Now, as you see, as you demonstrated, and as is needed here, this tool has taken on a different meaning. So I don't want anybody to think, unless I'm wrong, about where I think the board's want to go. We're not interested in going into a total site-specific area of the city and bulldozing. We're just looking to facilitate construction, renovation, partnering with our enterprise fund electric department, maybe to provide rehab, energy efficiency, and other models. And maybe it might be that some models actually are different. Financial sources or other past methodologies are not working in today's market, and we're just systematically trying to bring the best for the citizens. I mean, because as you see from Craven Terrace, that is definitely a model that there's just so much need for renovation in New Bern, and we're all just sitting here, not making it happen. And I think the board wants to. So if I'm wrong on any of that, or help me.
When you were talking about the revenue bonds, are you talking about the UDAG, that UDAG grant? That was an urban development grant.
Right.
So
and that was
the major funding source they had for the redevelopment of what they call Bicentennial Park. So I don't know, what would the correlation be to this day? There's no more UDAG grants. I don't know, is it the CDBGs, but
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of those state and federal grant programs just don't
Just
exist
went away.
anymore. Yeah. Mhm. But Mayor, I think you put it well in that you've heard me talk a lot about that any of the tools that you exercise through this redevelopment area have to be in line with the goals and objectives set forth in the plan. And those goals and objectives come from the community. They're a vision that hopefully is reflective of recent planning efforts of C&I. So if the vision from the community is, I don't know if this is, I'm just going to put some examples. We want to preserve and honor our history and historic structures. We want to increase home ownership. We want to support more small businesses. If those are the goals, then any tools you exercise have to help you meet those goals. So there's a system of checks and balances within this redevelopment plan that makes sure that the community, one, has a voice in establishing what those goals are, and the Redevelopment Commission is held accountable in that they have to use tools that are only in accordance with the goals. And really, the goal is a shared vision for the public and private sector and lowering the barriers to entry for the private sector, making it a little bit less risky and a little bit less uncertain for private investors to come to the table because they know they'll have a partner in the city.
So what I'm hearing is, from what the mayor just said, we're looking like home ownership in the blighted areas, establishing that there, figuring out which is the best direction to go, bring those areas up to standards for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Like in Rocky Mount, like you said, in Wilson, Durham, Greensboro, Winston-Salem. When I was at meetings, they actually taken us on tours to see these areas that's actually been brought up to standards, the blighted areas. And I think this is where this board is heading at, also to do the same thing in this area here. Because when you come off the bypass, that's the first thing that you see. It's like they done in Charleston. They changed that whole entire area there just like that. So I guess that's what we're looking at.
Well, I think the other thing is that I know in the case of Rocky Mount, I think part of what happened there started with the flood,
Mm-hmm.
and I think part of that they received a lot of golden leaf funding because they came up with a plan, and the city of New Bern just has not had that.
Right.
And we need that. And would you, having said that, are there areas within the state that you can give testament to that in setting up the redevelopment commission that funds that you never thought about became available? That when the city took the initiative to show that we want to make it happen, that then other sources of funds, 0% interest with the State Employees Credit Union to go build apartments for teachers is available.
Right.
And those type tools.
I think a lot of these funders, state and federal funders, they want to make wise investments too, right? So although this plan doesn't guarantee any funding, I think the act of making a plan and showing that you're serious goes a long way in showing other actors that an investment in you would be a wise investment, that you intend to follow
Terrace
through.
the other day, you know, the Housing Authority, the NC Finance was there, and to me, I'm just going to tell you as an individual, those guys that were there the other day, I thought were very impressed. They saw a community that's working together. And prior to that, as far as I was concerned, those guys might as well have been in Hawaii. I mean, I never felt like they were as close to New Bern as I felt the other day, and we have the 9% out on this board now. And I feel like we can go get those types of monies that we are showing that we want to do business. And I just have never felt, I felt so distanced from those types of monies before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll say one example from Kinston is the Riverwalk. So the Riverwalk that the public invested in to connect the URA, the residential URA, to downtown, in part used NCDOT funding.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would gather that probably what made them more competitive for that funding was showing that it was part of a larger redevelopment vision. So I don't think having a plan, so long as it's an actionable plan, a plan that has steps forward in front of it, I think is always a good way to show to other funders that you're serious.
So for me, with being transparent, I feel like the reason we're here for this meeting is specifically because it's one area. So with the URA, for me to understand, the plan is specifically based for 5 points. It's not where we have a URA and, okay, we're done with 5 points, we can go down the street to another blighted area. It has to be for a specific location.
It has to
So-
be within that geography, absolutely.
Right,
Yep.
so it is for a specific location, it's for the 5-point area that we as a board feel we need to get up to par because it's been lacking over 40, 50 years now.
Right.
Okay.
And as you pointed out, you can only use those tools within those geographic boundaries. Now, you might be successful, and in 10 years you say, okay, we're ready to move on and establish another URA somewhere adjacent or nearby. But
And we're able to create the lines of
yes, that is the first step, is determining those boundaries, and then there are a lot of checks and balances to vet those boundaries. The planning board vets it, the public gets to vet it twice, and then ultimately it comes before the Board of Aldermen. So that is the first step, is defining the geography, the specific boundaries. All right, so we had talked earlier about the C&I, the Choice Neighborhoods Plan, and the question of, can we just build on this, right? We've already done a pretty exhaustive planning effort that sets out some goals. How does this come into play? I'd say yes, and you want to make sure that you're including all of these required elements that are required by state statute in the URA plan. And I'll go through each of these with examples. First one, boundaries, right? What's the geography? You have to establish on a map the specific street boundaries for every parcel that's in the URA or not in the URA. So that's step number one. Another thing is the map of existing land uses. I've got examples of these. Before I go into those, I'm just going to touch on some other plan elements that I think can help tell the story, is the history of the area, the rationale, the process of community involvement that was behind the URA. Aren't things that are required by state statute, but I think are important to include. You also must include, as I said, the boundaries and existing land use. So here's an example of a map. This is from West Greenville that very clearly outlines where the URA is and what the existing land uses are within that URA. So this, again, is a required element of the plan. Standards of population densities, land coverage, and building intensities. So basically saying, how dense do you want this area to be? Is this going to be a very dense area with high-rise buildings? Do we want to make sure we preserve some green space or land or gardens in this area? So you also have to state that in the plan. How dense in terms of people, in terms of buildings, in terms of green space that we want to dedicate, do we want this area to be? A preliminary site plan. So again, in that plan, you know where you want different types of uses or investment to occur. So you have to have a preliminary site plan. Any proposed changes in zoning. Any proposed changes in street layouts or street levels. And key element, the estimated costs and financing. So there has to be a budget attached to this URA. It may change, it may evolve, but there does have to be some sort of financial feasibility tied to the URA plan, which I think speaks to what you were getting at, Alderman Kinsey, is that you want this to be a plan that's action-oriented.
Absolutely.
And the state statute agrees. They want to see a plan of financing behind
You can
this.
see, you can do a study and put it in the drawer and come back to
Right.
it next year and then
Right.
do a new study.
Yep,
And
yep.
then it's no action actually
Yeah.
taken, but
Yeah.
we're going to take action this time.
Right, yeah. And I think having this financial feasibility, having the budget is what helps to get you closer to that implementation and action. Another required element is the statement of continuing control. So basically saying, how are we going to use our codes, our regs, our restrictive covenants, our processes to help make sure that we're monitoring the goals that we set forth for this plan. And then any proposed implementation and phasing, right? Depending on how big the URA is, you're going to want to be strategic in where you start and where you end. You can't do it all at once, so you're going to want to have some plan of phasing in that plan. All right, so I have some questions next, just to get your wheels turning. You don't have to answer today, but things that I would encourage you all to think about as you consider whether you want to embark down this road. But I'll pause there before I get to next steps.
I have a question about the lines. So say we're in the area and you have 5 houses on a street, but 3 of them need help, the other 2 don't. We map it so that if at any point in time those other two houses become an issue, it's already part of the URA, but the individuals still own their home. They don't lose their home. We're not taking it. It's just so that it's within the realm of the URA.
Exactly, yeah. As Alderman Bengal asked earlier, it does have to be a contiguous area. And just the act of drawing the boundaries, all the properties stay in the same ownership. If the Redevelopment Commission wants to acquire properties, they have to go out and acquire them just like any other seller would. So the act of drawing the boundaries and including a property in the URA means that they're open to different tools, but doesn't mean that the Redevelopment Commission will necessarily acquire those properties.
Let's use the term subdivision. So would you use that as a term, as a subdivision? It's like in the Duffy Field area, everybody call the whole place Duffy Field area, but it's a subdivision that's divided up. So would you say that you would work in a subdivision to develop a subdivision, maybe?
Yeah,
Is that
that's a
good
way to
term
think about it.
use?
Yeah, you could say, yeah, you're working within different sub-areas or sub-districts of the wider area. I mean, the first step would be
Total boundaries.
doing the boundaries.
Doing the
And we
boundaries.
would get a lot of data to do those boundaries. We wouldn't just draw them on a map. We'd get data like, what are the current land uses? What's the ownership? Where are there vacant properties? Where's tax value higher or lower? Where are there issues with code enforcement or crime? We'd get all that data and use that to draw the boundaries, would be how I would recommend doing it. And have it be a pretty public process. You'd want the community to help you draw those boundaries and think about what the best boundaries are. It's a big first step. Drawing the boundaries takes some time. Keep moving? Okay. All right, so next steps. Consider what are the boundaries of the proposed URAs and what are the different options. You might play with some different boundaries. What will the Redevelopment Commission look like? Will it be the Board of Aldermen or will it be an independent commission? Who is the community when it comes to the proposed URA? Who are the folks that you need to make sure you're engaging early and often? What's the degree of community involvement? Which stakeholders should you include at the outset? Are there certain groups you want to make sure are represented on your Redevelopment Commission? And who's responsible for owning that involvement and making sure the community is engaged throughout the process? How will you keep the general public informed, right? There might be folks who don't live in Greater Duffy Field but want to know what's going on. So I've seen URA plans that were successful have websites or have a lot of press releases or ways that they're keeping people updated. What are any challenges that you might anticipate? What data has already been collected? It sounds like a lot. What data needs to be collected? What role will stakeholders play, like the aldermen, the commissioners, the Board of Aldermen? And who will write the plan? Who's going to put that together? All things to consider. That's it from me. Again, if y'all are interested in learning more, I'd encourage you to engage my colleague Tyler Mulligan in a second of this workshop series, which goes into more of the legal considerations for the URA. I think we'll answer a lot of those questions that we were wrestling with earlier. So here if you have questions or comments. Thank you.
Board have questions, comments?
No, I'd just like to kind of thank, first of all, Marcia, thank you. You always do a great job. And
Thank you.
I'm really pleased to see how many people are really interested in this. So it's obvious the time is now. We have lots of people. We don't get this many people at our meetings in the evening. So this is a good thing for us. And it says there's a lot of interest and people want to be engaged in the process. So what are our next steps as far as a board? Can we schedule our next meeting? I know we want to hear from, we have several private developers that are interested in this area that are currently either buying property or in there and want to know more, and I think they want their voices to be heard. So I don't know if that's the next meeting, or Mr. City Manager, what do you recommend as what our next steps are? And I want to hear from Tyler too.
Yeah, I mean, Tyler would be a great opportunity for us to learn about that. Obviously, public engagement is something that obviously is of importance of what Marcia's presented here. So I think at some point you need to hear from the community and some of those stakeholders that live in the community initially. And then ultimately the board needs to make a decision as to what they want to do, and then we can start marching down a path based on that decision.
To echo off what you just said, to let them know that we are serious, we need to let, let the folks that have something in place bring it forward, where we can look at it, make a decision based on what we're learning that's out there to move forward.
Thank you, Marcia, for your presentation. And I just want to thank the citizens of New Bern that come out this afternoon to be a part of this presentation. And I just want my constituents of Ward 5 and the entire city as well to know that my main objective here is for this redevelopment commission to be able to come in and provide funding, be able to go into an area which we're saying is Duffy Field and the Greater Five Points, to redevelop those areas. I can speak for myself and on behalf of the board as well, that's our main objective here. We're not out here to try to take property from individuals' property away from them. We want to see a redevelopment in an area that is long overdue. So that's our main objective here. Thank you.
My only thought would be is, we were able to get this information. I do feel as a board that before we do start to engage the public and go down that route, that we really need to discuss as a board with everyone present, as if this is what this is what we want to do, because this is just one of the tools to go into that community and to redevelop it. But I just want to make sure that for this to be successful, we all have to be on the same page. And I feel like further discussion with each of us in a work session, a public meeting, to discuss each and everyone's individual thought process, because we haven't had a chance to do that. We as a board discuss, okay, is this really something that we want to do? For me, that's how I feel. Before we have another meeting, I think that should be the next meeting, is to discuss, is this something that we really want to do? I mean, because, Alderman Jeff is not here. I know he's able to see the information, but I want everyone to be on board. That's for us to be successful.
I agree with you, but before we can really make any real decisions, I think we should listen to phase 2. Mm-hmm. So we'll have all the information before we have our discussion. I mean, the legal part's coming up. We need to listen to that before we even make a decision. Is this the direction we're going to take?
Okay.
Wouldn't that?
I think so.
So is the board interested in directionally going forward with the second phase of this?
Absolutely.
Okay. And is the board at a point where, I could just speak for me, I would not be interested in the New Bern Board of Aldermen being the commission. I would rather that.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Pretty much in favor of that.
Well, I feel that one of us,
Right.
or two of us
Oh,
on this
no,
board
no,
needs to
I
be
agree.
part of it.
Be represented.
I think it should
Yes.
almost be the one areas that are represented, so at least the voice of those people are heard,
Right.
wherever depending on what the boundaries are.
No, I was just answering that
Yeah.
question because the mayor said he didn't feel that the board should be
No,
involved.
we
No,
don't.
no, he meant the board,
I
that
know what he
was
meant,
one
but
of the
that's not what
options.
I know that's what he meant,
Hence
but
the
that's
reason
not what
why
he
I said we
said.
need to have our discussion
Well,
before we
can
move
have
forward
that
with
now.
other steps.
We can have that now and just say we either agree or disagree that it shouldn't be that the Board of Aldermen should be the redevelopment commission. I think that's what you were asking.
Thank you.
And I agree with that.
Right, as long as we have at least representation from the board. I definitely, if we have a commission, I definitely want to be on the commission because I represent majority of the minority wards, so.
And so do I as well.
And so do I. we the three of us have the wards that are most impacted.
May I suggest, I think understanding more about the legal requirements is a great way to gather more information. And then perhaps having a meeting where some of this content is repeated, but with the public and more of an informal sit-down session, as well as maybe some maps to start thinking about what the boundaries might look like, could be a next step to community engagement.
I think it's important. I don't know how you feel, but anybody that's out there that would like to reach out and send me their comments, I'm certainly willing to hear any comments from today, questions, whatever. I think it's good that you feel that same way, Jamie, everybody else. I think it's good for us to hear as we're going through this process what you're thinking and your thought process. Again, everybody's going to have a chance to speak, but as we move forward, I'm happy to listen to any comments or concerns that you might have.
And when you return, can you bring some of those pretty pictures in from some of the other areas that you and I talked about that I've seen before that would be very impressive, be a selling point to some of the people that have not seen the things? That would
Sure,
be impressive.
yeah, happy to provide more
Thank you.
pictures or more context and case studies, because
Yeah,
it is
yeah,
helpful to understand how these tools get implemented, absolutely. I
Appreciate
might get with you to figure out, we only have so much time, so which specific
It's only
communities
short,
would be
like,
most
Rocky
compelling?
Mount, Wilson, those
Right.
areas,
Okay.
that we showed one of
Yep,
them.
but more pictures?
Yes,
Sure.
close by.
Yeah.
If someone wants to take a drive there to.
Right, right,
To take a look.
yep.
Mr. Mayor, I
Absolutely.
think it's very important that we continue on with this process, and I would like to see us do a second workshop as soon as possible on the legal.
We're gonna do a little doodle on that, or?
Are we gonna
you
have
wanna set it now?
We will include the public as well?
They're always.
Yeah, because we're having an open meeting,
Okay.
absolutely.
Are we allowed, are people allowed to ask questions now, or are we gonna have a special time, since, you know, on her information that she provided, if anyone, are they allowed to do that or not?
It's at pleasure of this board, any type of,
Say that again?
whatever you,
It's our decision.
Well, can I ask for a show of hands if there's anyone in the audience that has a question for Marcia based on the information she presented? Okay. I'd like to make a motion that we allow for any questions from the public for Ms. Marcia specific to her information if they had a question.
I second that.
Thank you.
let me make sure, you have a motion second, so we're in the discussion phase. I think that it's important to qualify what the questions are germane to your presentation,
Right.
are good philosophical or other ideological opinions or stuff would not be. Is that what you're
No
asking?
opinions, we just, if they have any questions based on the information you provided, that's it. No comments, just a question based on your information, because you're here, and it's easier while you're here than to send an
Fine
email.
with me,
Right.
absolutely.
Okay, and we have that motion second, so all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same. At this time, anybody that would like to come up and ask succinct questions associated with the, yes, yeah, and you're free to come up.
Mark, do you have to turn this on over there?
And just name and address for the record.
My name is Dan Fry, and I live at 1414 News Boulevard, which is just outside of the Five Points area, but it's in an area that needs redevelopment. And I guess one of the questions I had is, this isn't necessarily a national program. It's been developed by the University of North Carolina, right?
You mean the URA?
Yes.
No, it is not a national program, nor was it developed by UNC Chapel Hill. It's a state, it's a local designation that's enabled by state statute.
Okay, great. Thank you. One of the things that I really picked up on, and I guess I've lived in New Bern for about 4 years, is that I think the Five Points area has stalled. I think there's nothing happening there. It's dead. And I think it's a great piece of real estate for this city. And one of the things that she said that I picked up on was that investors need confidence that something is going to happen that's good. And I felt like that was one of the key points here. And I think that's what's wrong with Five Points, that investors are afraid to invest in that area for reasons they don't know what's going to happen. So I think what you were saying fits pretty well with what we ever need to fill.
That is definitely a key takeaway, is sending that market signal to build confidence, and I'm glad that came across. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I just want to be clear that at this time, it's specific questions from Marcia, because there will be a time during this process where we will have a public hearing, just because we want to be specific. If you have a question for Marcia, this is the time to ask that question based on her presentation. Is there anybody else?
Please come up, if you would, for the podium so that everybody can hear your question.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Adolph. My question is, who does all that work, the next steps piece? Because having spent the better part of the last decade and watching about $600,000 in planning grants of the Renaissance Gateway Plan and Choice Neighborhood, all of those steps, been there, done that several times, into Alderman Kenzie's questions about plans not implemented. So I know how much work is involved in those next steps. And I'm wondering who's in charge of that, who pays for it, and who pays for it.
Yeah, I agree. This is a big job. It's a lot of steps. Putting it together, a redevelopment plan is no small task. I will say that New Bern is in a little bit of an unusual position in that you've done so much planning already. So there's a good foundation to build on. So so long as the community agrees that the goals set forward in the CNI plan and the Gateway Renaissance plan are still good goals that we can work with, I think you do have a little bit less of a road to hoe relative to other communities where this is the first plan they've ever made for an area. So I do think you have a head start and that you can use a lot of what you've already done to build on, to get to the finish line a little bit quicker. But it is a question. It's a question there. Who will write the plan? Some communities choose to do it in-house. Others choose to hire consultants to help write that plan. It's your wish.
We probably don't have that answer until we go to the next step. So
Right.
we'll put that on parking lot.
One question while you wait to see if anybody else wants to come up. Have you seen instances where with the Redevelopment Commission that for the commercial end of it, it is wound up establishing an MSD for that particular area?
Yes, sometimes.
Has that happened?
Right. And I think they wanted to hear the answer to the other question was that they don't have an answer yet. They're going to keep thinking about who writes it and what the next steps are. But your question is there overlap with an MSD or municipal service district?
Have you seen where when some cities have done this, particularly associated with the commercial end of it, that they've established MSDs to really
Yeah, I
sustain
think
it?
so. For example, in Rocky Mount, there's also, I think, an MSD as well as the URA. So yes, sometimes there's some overlap, but they do offer somewhat of similar tools. I think the URA offers a little bit more in your toolkit, but yes, if it's a commercial area, then certainly an MSD can be an additional tool to provide long-term funding to help support investments or revitalization goals in that area. So certainly there could be some overlap. I'd say the difference is that the URA is in some ways more short-term in that you're establishing the URA so that you can catalyze redevelopment with the hopes that it's successful in 5 to 10 years, whereas a municipal service district, generally the goal is that that's a long-term district to provide revenue year after year to help meet other goals within the MSD. So yes, there can be some overlap, but tend to have different strategies behind them, if that makes sense.
I have a question for you.
Right. There are other tools like a special assessment district, which is North Carolina's name for a TIF, that you could also use in this case.
Ms. Marcia, based on your expertise in the projects that you have worked on, from starting the URA to implementation, how long has it taken? Is it months, years, decades?
Hard to say. I mean, it depends a lot on the unique market conditions and how thoughtful the plan is. I'd say, so, I mean, redevelopment is not a game for the weak, right? Or you have to be courageous to take on revitalization. So I'd say the answer is years. Rarely is it months, although sometimes you can see changes happening quickly. Really, it's so unique to the market conditions of an area. I'll say that things I'd encourage in order to be more successful, though, and get to redevelopment more quickly would be not drawing a huge redevelopment area, being pretty thoughtful and strategic, and creating a smaller, manageable URA where you're more likely to have success, and being very thoughtful and drawing those boundaries at the outset can help ensure that you'll get, there's no assurances in revitalization, but can help lend itself to more success.
One more question, okay. So you said earlier that if you wanted to do commercial and residential, it should be separate, but what if no?
It doesn't have to be separate, but if the goals are very different, then you might want to consider separate URAs.
Okay, because what comes to mind is Broad Street, because on Broad Street, you can see so much commercial that needs to be there, so it cultivates, economic development by having businesses, and then behind Broad Street, you have, the 5 Point area as well, which is, so.
Yep. It could be commercial and residential.
Okay.
Yep. You just want to, you're probably going to have different goals for each, so you'd want to be very clear about those different goals in the plan.
Oh, yes, sir, come right on up.
Good afternoon.
Good
I'm
afternoon.
just here today to discuss some of the conditions that are happening in the 5 Points and the Duffield area. I remember the 5 Points were thriving businesses, and Duffield was thriving with businesses in Duffield. And I remember when downtown was about to die, and we had a committee to go to South Carolina when Hazel came through and just about destroyed everything down in South Carolina. We went down there and saw how they had begun to rebuild. And we used some of the same plans that they had used, and we placed them back in the downtown area, and downtown is blooming right now. And I wanted to make sure that the 5 Points area and the Duffield area would get some attention, because the 5 Points area, they had all kinds of businesses in the 5 Points area. Movie, theaters, 5 and 10 cent stores, feed stores. It's some of everything you can name, but now you can't hardly find one in there. And also in the Duffield area, we had little small businesses, at least about 12 small stores throughout the Duffield area, and throughout the Duffield area was thriving, and I'm sure we can do this again, working together. We need to use all our resources in these areas, and especially, I say, in the flood zone out there with those ditches and everything. We could fix that place up, that we could be proud of it just as we are proud of the downtown area.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Sampson, we're going to probably be depending on you to help us out quite a bit with the county commissioners on
Yes.
some of these properties that are
Yes.
jointly owned.
I'll do all I can.
Might even need you to serve on the board.
Come on up if you have a question.
Don't forget to state your name and your address for us, please.
How you doing? My name is Amir Mack. I'm from Mack Investments, LLC. We have properties in the 5 Points area. I'm just curious.
What was your address for the record?
It's 219 West Lane.
Thanks, sir.
I'm just curious. The URA funding, would that be for only redevelopment issues, as far as with people that's coming in to redevelop the area, or the homeowners that's already there? Will they be able to get those fundings to fix their houses and things of that magnitude, or is it just for people that's coming in saying, hey, we're buying this up to change the area?
That's a great question. And I'll say that you would be part of the person who's deciding that as a property owner. So it could be both. A lot of redevelopment areas I've seen that have commercial and residential would be both, helping commercial businesses as well as existing homeowners. But it would be up to the community to say, here are the goals and here's how we want to be strategic and use our tools. So if that was the will of the community, and you as a property owner would certainly, hopefully, be participating and coming up with those goals, then yes, if that's something that everyone else agrees.
So that means that there will be funds available for individual homeowners themselves to be able to address from the URA to fix their houses, instead of just saying, well, your property's derelict and it's being condemned, you don't have the funds to do it, move out.
Part of this is there's already a lot of things available that nobody knows about because we're not pursuing them. And part of that is to get all those tools together, enumerate them, and have them available. The VA with foreclosed properties makes a tremendous discount. If a police officer will buy that home in that area, they will discount it significantly just to get a police officer to live in that area. So there's all those type of tools out there that we're not using.
I'm talking about the older people that's living in the area that own their homes, that can't afford to bring their homes up to current standards.
Austin, Texas, and Fayetteville, North Carolina, PwC, great programs. And that's the type of things we need to be doing.
And we do have CDBG. We have, I see Landa here. We have some CDBG funds that are out there too to help people who meet certain income levels and that are not able to fix up their homes can do that. But it would be depending on the funds, how it looks. But if certainly we want everybody to bring the level of the neighborhood up. That would be my goal in making sure.
When we speak about the funds with the URA, it's something where it's a loan, correct?
Well, it could be whatever they set it up to be.
Right, that's what my understanding would be like, it could be a loan or a grant,
Right.
depending on how it's set up to be given out.
But it
My
may
thing-
have criteria to it too.
Right.
The criteria may be that, you know, I don't know, that you put something on the outside that's not going to have to be painted every year, so
Right.
more durable, something
Understand.
like that could be that kind of criteria. A good example of what a redevelopment of an area, if you look at Third Avenue, is it Third Avenue?
Yes.
Where the city had bought all those houses, tore them down, there's a lot of controversy, but look at it now, it's like a boulevard, it's beautiful with a sidewalk, and now what's happened, people across the street have started fixing up those homes.
Right.
And it's really made a beautiful visual impact coming down that street to Stanley White. So I think it's, those are the tools that would be used, I hope, that would help people.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Don't know until we get there.
I'll add that
Ms. Hatter, you want to come up, or can you bring her a mic, or do you want to come up? Okay.
I'll add that, sir, you're asking really good questions, and I hope that you participate, because we need people like you who are asking those kinds of questions.
Praise the Lord, everybody.
Praise
I have a good question. I think you have a building that is booming, in good shape, and it's being reused. And if the hurricane destroys it, and then the city have the fiber to put sign up there so you can't do anything to it, I don't know, is that right?
This might be a question for the attorney, I think. Is,
I said that I have a question. If you have a building that is booming and being used for good everything that is good, and the hurricane hit your building and it was in tip-top shape, you paid taxes and had to pay the light bill and everything else, and then they had these firemen to come and put a sign on the door so you couldn't do anything to it, wouldn't give you opportunity to even try to do anything. I would know what can be done about that.
Well, Ms. Sampson, if you had a building that had a business and the hurricane tore it up, there's a couple avenues. One, I would think that your private insurance should rebuild the building if you had insurance on the building. And two, there was also, if it was a declared event, FEMA was certainly available at the time to assist with that as well.
Well, I went to FEMA. I went to the meeting in FEMA. It was over there at the Eccles building.
And the sign that's on the door for the fire department just means that before you reoccupy the building, you need a fire inspection.
And it also said that the neighbors were, it was a hassle to them, but it was not, because the neighbors were the one that helped me to refurnish the building. That's what I cannot understand. And and not only that, that's a historic building. And it was under the grandfather clause, but then they tried to tell me it wasn't under the grandfather. I know it was under the grandfather clause, because I've been living longer than most of you young folks here. And I know what was happening in there, because I was part of it from a teenager. That's all I need to do. Thank you very much. I hope y'all can rest easy. Think about an old person that's trying to make something to help other people. Hope you rest easy. I hope you sleep good tonight, thinking about us. Thank you.
Miss Sampson.
Yes, darling.
And Marcia probably can elaborate a little bit more on that. As we said a little bit earlier, that when I asked the question about the age of the home, if it's classified as historical or not, and she said that would be included.
Yes.
So, I mean, she can give you a little bit more detail if she wants to elaborate on that, about the historical portion of it, since you said it was 50 years older?
It was 1950.
Okay,
It's
1950.
over 50 years.
Yes.
Thank you.
Might want to consider seeing if it's on the National Register, or if not, making sure that it is listed, to open up some other financing tools that might not be possible otherwise. So I can give you my card and we could talk about that some more.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Clarence Monroe, proprietor, landowner. I live in 5 Points. I go to church in Dufferfield. My kids are raised in Dufferfield in the 5 Points area. I've been there all my life. And one thing she said, every community is different. But when you've been in the community all your life and you see the differences just in certain communities, and you just, I don't know how many times I've been to these strategic planning boards meetings, but all of them are the same. We get pamphlets, we get promises, caviar wishes, and sardine dreams. But one thing you said that made a lot of difference, we need a community center. If you're going to construct all these new businesses, we got to teach our people how to respect them. I appreciate all y'all new businesses that have come into the 5 Points, Mr. Bern and the coffee shop that's coming, but there was a group of guys that sit right behind the building where the gentleman's opened a coffee shop. Now, I think last week they had an ordinance to move them guys from there, but you didn't lock them up, you didn't run them out of town. They're still here. And so when you got the new business coming in and you got these guys that don't know how to really respect themselves, how they going to respect the new businesses and the money that you're talking about allocating for 5 Points and Dufferfield. So I think a community center would be fine for the area. For you thought about new businesses, rehabbing houses, just kind of construct our people's minds to keep these things nice and decent, you know what I'm saying, instead of being like little areas we could take a little drink behind the corner, or we could sell a little dope and nobody don't see us. And you got all them cameras in Craven Terrace. The guy told me the other day, they don't mean a thing. They still gonna do it. So we don't educate our people about, destroying themselves. This project, ERA, it could be DOA.
Amen.
So we must put education in the community to teach our people. And I'm not saying just black people, I'm talking about colored people. We got the Burmese people, we got the Latinos. They're just as bad as everybody. Like, all the folks are bad in that area now. I see it all day, different nationalities walking around. 10 years ago, you wouldn't see that. But we need a community center so we can take that problem off the street, and maybe we could just let them sit down in a conference room and kind of, let them know this is our home, this is our front yard, our backyard. We we just cannot destroy our minds, our youth, when they get off the school bus. They look over that place they call the living room. They see 30 different men, their uncle, their daddy, their brother. That's not a vision forward. It's a step backwards. So I commend everything we're trying to do for my community. I've been there as long as anybody in this room. If I don't know what's going on, nobody do. We need a community center. We need it to help the men out there that think that they don't have. We have a lot of lumber, a lot of timber out here. If we don't put nothing but a toothpick factory, a broom factory, something to educate them demented minds, that get some constructed on it. You know what I'm saying? And now I look around, I don't see any of those stores that sell the Lucy's, the beer, and the rolling papers. Where are they at? 365 days a week, 12 months out of the year. They don't close. They get most of the money in the neighborhood. So, ma'am, thank you for your endeavors. I looked like I saw you 10 years ago, but it could have been somebody that looked like you. But I've been in so many of them, but I appreciate you. And whatever you're trying to do for New Bern, God bless you. But we need that community center bad. But it don't make no sense for Mr. Springer to do all that pretty renovation doing out there. I commend you, girl. You're doing great.
It's my daughter.
But
my daughter and
her
husband.
Pardon me?
It's my daughter and her husband.
I thank your family then.
Yes, it's my family. Thank you.
Because I just don't want my people to walk around and just disrespect it.
Right.
Thank you very much.
He brings up a good point. Maybe we should, sooner than later, look at maybe having some type of conferences or something, some educational period of some of the community centers that we have there on home ownership or something. It necessarily doesn't have anything to do with this, but it would be a nice, something to offer. Maybe to our recreation department could schedule something where we get some experts to come in and talk about the steps in home ownership. a good point, Clarence.
Well, I'd like to touch on that. I think that's a great idea because I've been saying that for a very long time, that we can sit here and have these meetings and try and change the infrastructure, but if we don't help the community and educate and do any of that, it's been a waste of time. So I feel that we have to, as long as we're doing it legally, we need to set ourselves apart from other cities and be in the business of building affordable housing, but also educating on how to keep your house, how to budget. So doing that, I feel, would be an overall package, not just building a home. You have to teach them how to keep the home. So I think that's very important. Like Mr. Monroe stated, that it's important that we get the public to come out and speak, but you have to tell us what you want in that community. How can we help you? So we see you here at these meetings, continue to come to these meetings and voice your opinions during that process. So, because this is not, you know.
Well, I know that the city do offer programs like this, because I see two people sitting out here in the audience right now that is very good, strong community leaders, and that's Mr. Mike Avery and Ms. Teresa Lee. And I know that she has done in the past a lot of workshops on that very subject we're talking about. So I don't know if she's still active in doing those workshops or not in the community, but I'm gonna have to get with you. Are you Ms. Teresa Lee?
I'm still a certified councilman, yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people doing it here.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'll add that what the gentleman was saying is that it's not just about the bricks and mortar, the built environment, it's about the social and economic circumstances too. And if I'm not mistaken, the C&I plan also covers those elements as well, right? Education, economic development. So it sounds like it needs to be a holistic approach, and it also sounds like you're an expert with a lot of knowledge and wisdom to give about what's happening in the community, and I'd encourage you, if the city moves forward, to participate, because it sounds like you have a lot to bring to the table.
Any other questions out there? And if you would just please state your name and address.
Hey, my name is David White. I live at 227 East Front Street. Sorry to make you repeat yourself. I just want to clarify something. Can the Redevelopment Commission put restrictive covenants on the whole site plan or just the acquired parcels?
The Redevelopment Commission can only put restrictive covenants on the properties that they own.
Okay.
So just the acquired parcels. But great point of clarification. I know it got a little confusing.
Could you give us a couple of examples of some of those restrictive covenants that have been put on in the past?
They can adjust the zonings, though, which do allow them to somewhat restrict what goes on the site as far as future development.
Yep, can adjust the zoning. Examples could be, let's say that the Redevelopment Commission acquires a portfolio of 10 vacant residential homes. That part of the goal is to fix up those homes for home ownership. They acquire the homes, they rehabilitate them, they then want to sell those homes, but they put a restrictive covenant that says if you buy one of these houses, it has to be owner-occupied for 20 years. Or you have to be a first-time home buyer, something like that. Could be an example.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, sir. If you come forth and state your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon. Mike Duffy, 121 Morning Dove Trail, Trappers Creek. I just wanted to ask you, you have a big effort coming up again this year on Paint Your Heart Out. Is it possible that any of those volunteer hours or materials contributed could be considered matches towards grants or anything like that? Is that?
Okay, great. Mr. Stevens?
Great question. Normally, normally matches, well, depends on the grant. Sometimes in-kind labor and support stuff can be used towards matches on grants, but it depends on the grant and what you apply for. Most of the materials that we have for Paint Your Heart Out are donated anyways. We do have some funds that we expend from the city resources. I think last year, Landa's here. I know we spent some of the city funds on some materials, and for the program itself, we kind of had them combined, which was the Paint Your Heart Out as well as the other group that came in to do some of the upfits and repairs to some of the homes. But this year, I think we're separating them out and kind of keeping them separate of one another. with the Paint Your Heart Out coming in. Is it June this year? Is that correct, Landa? Yeah, June, it's in June this year is when we will have the Paint Your Heart Out.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir, come on and give us your name and Elijah, if you will, for the record's address.
My name is Elijah Brown Jr., 916 Fort Titan Drive is where I live, right in the city of New Bern. Most of the things I had in mind and I wanted to say has already been said, but I'm not confused, but I'm listening at, I was listening at her report, and one of the questions that was asked, it said it could take months and years on this study. What I'm concerned about is these areas that we're talking about needs to be now, not years. It's fine, but it needs to be now. And the reason I say I'll be 60 years old February the 11th of next year. And all of my life, I've lived in Douglasville most of my life, at least in 3 areas. Then I moved on Cedar Street. And from Cedar Street to Trent Court, from Trent Court back to Douglasville on 8th Street. I moved in Trent Court. I moved in Craven Terrace. Then I moved on Fort Tartan. Buying my home, now I own my home. But my problem is, and I know it's probably going outside of what this is, but my thing is we have all these studies done all my life. All these promises have been done all of my life. Even in Trent Court. We signed papers and to get pools and cabinets and a lot of other things, and the money came in, the grants came in, and they were put somewhere else. So I'm just saying is when we do this study, when we do whatever we're saying we want to do for these areas, let's be honest and do it. Because we're not lazy. Some of us have money. We have doctors, we lawyers. They was in 5 points. But I've been in so many meetings, the Renaissance, and a lot of meetings since I was a child. But all I had is seeing my parents with promises. 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 We have a lot of other organizations talking about our community. And again, I say we're not lazy people. But when you come into our community and start tearing down, some of it needs to be torn down. I'm not going to sit up here and act like I don't know. But when you come and promise things and it don't happen, you have meetings, you ask us to come out. I've had hundreds of people to come out behind me to these meetings, and they get the same story. We're going to do. So people get burnt out. They get burnt out. They're not lazy. They don't want to be a person not being informed. But when they get out to these meetings, and a lot of them are deceased now, but I mean older people, they're looking. I've seen the YMCA created. I've seen people get on radio programs and give their income tax check. They give their welfare check. They give a Social Security check. And then their kids can't even afford to go to the Y. So I'm saying as this board, I believe in you. But help others in this community. Help others in this city to believe in you. I may have said more than I want to say, but that's my goal, is to see this board not sit.
Okay, Elijah, I think what you were saying is in the form of a question. You want to know when the next meeting of the new Board of Aldermen and the legal counsel or your legal expert, when would this board like to make that date?
As soon as possible.
Okay, so let's go ahead and decide on that date and see if that's yes.
We're going to have Tyler come. I need to check with his schedule before we set that date because he's a pretty busy man. If you want Tyler here.
Thanks for cutting me off, but anyway,
oh no, we
the last thing I want to say is this: when this happens, even though you get the the community input. I hope we don't go around them and not listen to them. Because so many times we have community meetings and they voice their opinion and what they want for their area and what they want for the community. Sometimes they're ignored. You go around them. I'm not saying particularly you are, but they go around and do what they want to do, and we don't want to see that in our community. And I just thank you for the time that you've given me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let me ask you a quick question. You talked about, because frankly, you scared me a little bit when you said years. I mean, that time frame is dictated on how fast we move, correct?
So when I was saying years, I was referring to implementation, that redevelopment or revitalization of an area can take years. I mean, that's just a fact of redevelopment. The planning process, so getting to that implementation stage.
I'm talking about starting time.
Starting time, in terms of getting through to a redevelopment plan.
So you weren't talking about starting time taking years?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I meant to fully realize the vision. I think if we're going to be realistic to fully implement a vision, it can take some time.
Yeah.
Getting through the redevelopment planning process it depends on how big the area is, how much we think we can use previous plans like CNI and Gateway Renaissance to give us a head start. So that's kind of up to you all how quickly we could move in terms of putting together a redevelopment plan. But it sounds like y'all done a lot of groundwork that you could move pretty quickly. And I hear you that people are fatigued and they're sick of being asked the same thing over and over again. Yeah.
For me, if we go down this route, I don't feel like we should be taking years to develop a strategic plan. I'm trying to break ground and fix houses while I'm still sitting on this board. Yep. And so that's the discussion that I'm saying is, we need to be different than any other city, whether we have to accelerate. And I know it takes time, but still I understand what they're saying because I represent, like I said, the majority of this ward, just like Barbara and Sabrina, and they're tired. So actually breaking ground and building a house and redevelopment is something that I'm trying to do. I don't want to take two decades with a plan. That's...
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, how many times have we been to different meetings and stuff, and the first thing out of everybody's mouth is meetings is that, well, we've already got a study on this. Where is it? We got studies upon studies upon studies upon studies sitting on a shelf somewhere.
I think what they're saying is we're ready to go to work.
Right.
We don't want to go back to this phase of doing this.
I would suggest that the board, when this presentation is over, get a city staff member to go down and see if prior to this meeting being over, that we can work out some suitable dates for the gentleman to come, and then we can approve that date prior to the meeting closing. Yes, sir.
Again, I'm Dan Fry, and I think my opinion is one of the best redevelopment programs in the country is when private investors are encouraged to go in and invest. Things happen. That's the way it happens fastest too. When private investors really have confidence that area is going to pop, things happen fast. And I think while you're here, what I'd like to ask you as a question to comment on is, did you see this in Kinston? And did you see it in Rocky Mountain? And did you see it in Greenville? That by having a URA and giving those investors confidence that something good's going to happen here, did private investors step up?
Yeah. I'll say Kinston is the only one I've been able to witness firsthand, but yes, absolutely. Building that confidence model can be really catalytic for private investment. And once, I think private investors tend to be kind of rearing and chomping at the bit to do investment. They just need that confidence to get started. So I think you hit the nail on the head, that building that confidence is key. And once folks feel confident and they know they have public support behind them, they'll move forward. Right. Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, seeing as how at this point we don't really have any more questions from Marcia, I would like to make a motion to close the question and answer process of Marcia's part, because there will be time to implement concerns and comments on the public.
Second that.
We have motion second. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed the same. Is it okay with the board that Mr. Stevens, if you could get somebody to go down and make some phone calls and see possibly a date that we don't have to wait?
Can you get up with Tyler to see a meeting?
I know he's teaching all day, so he probably by the end of the week we could get a set of dates from him. But
is it possible to even do it by phone?
There's another 2-week delay right there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we can do it by phone.
You could do it by phone.
Can some of your staff go do that? We don't want to wait 2 weeks.
We'll explore alternatives, knowing that moving quickly is of y'all's interest. We can explore alternatives if
We really
Tyler's
appreciate
schedule
some dates that
protracts
we
it.
could make a decision today.
We just feel, I think it's obvious that this is a priority to this board and moving this forward. As Mr. Brown said, we don't want to beat this dead
Yep,
horse. We want
totally.
to move on
Yep.
it. We've got a CNI. I mean, I think we have a
Right.
lot of the tools
You do,
you're talking about. The problem is we just have to get it forward. We
Right.
have to find some funding.
Yep.
We've got to answer some very basic questions, but I think it sounds like y'all are ready to go.
Yeah, I'll add that the part 2 isn't a necessity. It's a nice to have. You have a very experienced attorney here who could confer with Tyler and also convey some of his advice.
Well, that's
So-
even better.
And
So
what
if
is Mr.
if
Bates, what is your
scheduling
opinion
becomes
on
an
this, if
issue,
you
which
need that
I will say,
presentation?
Tyler is super busy, and I just realistically, I don't
Well, I'd
think you
rather
can get him down here within
be
2
part of
weeks
the
if that's
team.
your desire. So I'd suggest, I'm looking at Mr. Scott, but
Tyler's a dear friend, and we speak regularly about this. And Tyler and I have often chuckled that the legal piece of this is the easy piece. The statute gives us the recipe, steps 1, 2, 3. So the legal piece is not a problem. If you have if you want to do a deep dive into every single tool and become experts on all those niceties, Tyler's a great person for that. I can help with that as well. If you're asking, how do we draft this document and have you adopt it, we don't need Tyler for that. We can do that in 2 weeks. So it's just a question of what do you want to understand. You've got a great 30,000-foot overview of the generalized tools, but if you want to ask some significant questions about the subtleties of condemnation and how you can tie that to federal incentives, Tyler would be a great person for that. I just don't know how deep you want to go into those tools.
And that workshop could also occur, I'll say, during the planning process, perhaps. If this is a road that you want to go down, it might actually be more appropriate to have your redevelopment commission be the one who receives that information.
Right. So setting it up is not the problem. Setting up the redevelopment commission is not the problem. We can do that together. That's a rather garden variety process. I think your next big step is looking at the CNI boundaries and trying to get your minds around what kind of boundaries you have in mind. Jeff Ruggieri is very experienced in this. Staff's experienced in this. So we've got a lot of research, a lot of documentation. It's just a matter of getting it organized with you in a work session to get some of the.
I would suggest that the 3 aldermen that this most impacts have a meeting with the Development Services staff and define that boundary, and then maybe have a 2-hour meeting sometime very soon to further explore this redevelopment idea.
My only legal question would be, again, is looking at it how then we treat, housing, the housing authority, how we treat NRCDC. Are those tools that we use within this? Section 8. I know Ms. Lee is pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, an expert in affordable housing and doing a housing plan. What is a housing plan? Is that part of this tool, this process? And that was a question I didn't ask you about a housing plan. I really want to hear from her about that. So those are the little tweaky questions I have, but certainly we could bring that back in public, or get the boundaries first and then decide.
Yeah, and all these can happen in tandem. We can establish the commission, get it set up, decide how many members, who's going to serve, while we are looking at all the various tools and those ideas.
Okay, time is of the essence, and what I would do is if it's pleasure of the board, I'd like for Alderman Bingle, Alderman Harris, and Alderman Best to get with the Development Services staff and work through some of that, and then make a report back as expeditiously as you can to the board, keeping in mind that by the time a redevelopment commission might be established, that the due process of hearings through both the Board of Aldermen and the Planning Board will be conducted, and so that everybody does have an opportunity to be heard for the betterment of our city. Is that agreeable?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I only have a few questions too, because like you said, some of those properties are owned by the county. So at what point legally do we get in, do we have a discussion with the county in regards to that process? Because I feel like we can go so deep into this without finalizing whether this is the route we want to take. And that's what I'm saying. We're going to do all this, but what if we don't have enough votes to agree that we want to do a URA? So that's what I'm trying to get to.
I think it would be great if maybe the city manager would just communicate with the county manager, let him know what we're
I think that's
looking
very
to do.
easy for me to do. Obviously, you've got a commissioner that's sitting here on the front row for the entire meeting, so obviously he understands our interest in it now, so I'm hoping that maybe he could share that with his colleagues as well. Might I also make a suggestion, Alderman Bingle, if anybody, if you have questions, my thoughts are is if you could send those to me, what I could do is accumulate those and maybe coordinate with Marcia and her schedule for the three of y'all to meet with Development Services, have her there, and then maybe if I forward those to her, she can develop those answers for those questions, and then we can discuss those at that meeting as well, if we want to look at things expeditiously.
Right.
Good.
Anything further on this item?
Public, when are we gonna set a meeting to have the individuals?
I think that would come after the next step.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to
Call it
get,
at our regular meeting, call for a public
Okay.
meeting.
No, the private sector. You know, there's individuals that want to present to us outside of doing a redevelopment commission about their thoughts on what they would want to do.
Would that be through the public hearing then?
I don't know, that's why I'm asking.
Well, I think we should hear from everybody. So let's get the boundaries, because the boundaries will be determined if they're gonna be involved, you know, whoever would want to be involved. I think that's important, or whatever we come up with.
I think it's real quick that we start thinking about stakeholders being,
Absolutely.
as well. Who do we want,
Yeah.
to ask to help with this?
The stakeholders, remember, based on the presentation, the stakeholders, not necessarily the stakeholders, but those that are important to the mission of what you want to do in this redevelopment area have to be consistent with what the redevelopment area is. So this map becomes very important. We need to make a decision on this boundary. So if the three of y'all want to get together later this week, we can do that, try to start establishing what this is. We could potentially add this to an agenda at our next board meeting to just confirm that the rest of the board agrees to where this area is, and at that point we can set a meeting, a special call meeting. You can call at any point, as long as if the mayor wants to call it or if two aldermen want to call it. The only issue with special call meeting is that's the only thing we're going to discuss is redevelopment at that point or whatever. So I'm happy to help expedite this as quickly as possible, but I think you would agree with me that the boundary becomes very important as to who you want to be in the stakeholder group.
Yep, boundaries are key issue, and the makeup of the redevelopment commission, which maps onto that, as you said.
Yeah.
Here, I think the absolute here is that we need a redevelopment commission, and at any time, any alderman with a motion, a second, wants to let any group come before the board and ask questions, make presentations. That's what this board does. I think it's worked well today the way we did it. That I personally myself, I had as many questions or lack of knowledge as anybody in this room, and so I think limiting the amount of comments and opinions and such is it's been the way to do this. And so now that we all have more facts than we had, I think again the ad hoc getting with the development services and working through it with time of the essence. And anytime you or any other alderman wants any group or whatever to
No, I just know that
you're welcome to do it.
Yeah, we had discussion because at this meeting there were supposed to be individuals to speak, and I know that we were going to take a separate meeting.
Okay,
That's correct. And
That's what-
that's what I would like to do, is I want to hear everything, but I want to go ahead and we'll have this meeting, the three of us, and decide where we're going to go, and then come back. And I want to hear from all the public, private developers or private people that want.
It would be kind of hard for us to answer questions if we don't have
Well, right,
we don't
I'm
have the
just
answers
asking
ourselves yet.
to make sure that that's still going to be part of the process.
I think it's got to be part of the
Yeah,
process.
I agree.
It's part of the process with
I wanna make sure
four
all
voting
those
members here
voices are-
saying it is. So if you want to do it today, if you want to do it in the
No.
next meeting, whenever, you're more than welcome to do it. One thing I think this board I pride on is it's been very respectful of the aldermen and their abilities to whatever you want to see done, get done. So, okay, are we through at this time with this
Yes.
phase of our workshop? Now, Mr. Stevens.
Okay, if we're done with redevelopment, thank you, Marcia and Omar. Appreciate y'all coming down. At this point, we're going to shift over to our Marietta Park plan. We have our consultants here. Some of you may have attended the presentation that we had last Monday night with regards to the park plan at Marietta Park. So we're going to have them tonight present that to you. As we said, we've got to move forward a little bit with some decision points.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I just want to say thank you for coming.
Well, we know what everybody was here for.
Yeah, isn't that nice? Hey, let me tell you, wouldn't it be nice if we could get that much attendance at our night meetings?
Mayor, Aldermen, happy to be here today to talk to you about the proposed Marietta Park. And today we have Mike Norris and Jim Boré with McGill Associates, and they're going to talk you through the program. And of course, if you have any questions along the way, please don't hesitate to ask.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Board. Appreciate the opportunity. Sorry I ran everyone off, but we're excited to talk to you about this project. I also have Jim Boré here with me to talk about some various ideas as far as potential funding and implementation opportunities as well. So some of you may have already seen the presentation, but I wanted to kind of revisit some of the primary highlights of what we did. We've had community meeting last Monday, actually, and had good participation. Had over 100 people attend this and had some good feedback, a lot of questions, a lot of clarifications. But as we go through this, if you have any questions or comments, just please feel free to jump in, and I'll try to address those as easily as possible. So our scope of work for this project, we're kind of on the latter end of this process. But several things we did. A primary component, of course, is site assessment and the needs assessment, public meetings, and going through and design considerations and finalizing with the conceptual design, which is where we are today. We've had a few opportunities for input from the public, primarily through a web-based survey questionnaire, as well as we held a public meeting at the New Bern Mall. Had a great participation. Over 200 people came in and gave us their ideas as far as what they would like to see, some of their concerns and issues. And here are a couple of examples. I've got another slide showing people putting dots on various amenities that they would desire to see. So it helps us give, as well as the participants, an opportunity to see what people are desiring for Marietta Park. As you can imagine, jogging and walking trails was a major consideration. And from this various means of survey, we developed a top 10, if you will. Those top 10 elements are highlighted in yellow that were the predominant preferences from the public. Outdoor performance area, boardwalks, water-based recreation was important, along with canoe, kayak, wildlife preservation. But a good variety of amenities were also expressed during the public process. And we had a fairly good turnout for the web-based survey. Over 853 responses on the surveys, representing over 1,500 people. And this is representation from our wards. Of course, this park is located in Ward 5. We had various questions. Are you a resident? Gender? And this was a fairly overwhelming, probably the most overwhelming question we had is are you in support or opposed to expanding recreational opportunities? And well over 90% were in favor of expanding opportunities. And again, the top list from the survey results from the web-based survey was very similar to the input we received from the public meeting held at the New Bern Mall. We asked the question of would you be willing to pay a nominal fee to use various activities and events, and there was a large majority that would be willing to pay a special use fee. And how would you fund parks? A good cross-section here. Grants, obviously, was a majority there. Taxes, project-specific bond referendum, contributions, local gifts, a good cross-section of folks that felt like there's a number of opportunities we could look at. We could talk a little further about that as well. So again, the overarching priorities from the desires of the community were jogging, walking trails, outdoor performance area, water-based recreation, adventure areas, as well as wildlife preservation and open space preserved. I feel that most of you know where the site is located, but it's maybe three miles northwest of downtown. And this is an aerial photograph dated around the 1990s that shows nearly all the area has been in some level of activity as being a part of the quarry site. So there's at some point throughout the evolution of this quarry, it's been disturbed, and it's, of course, as you know, it's gone through the process of evolving to more of a naturalized site. The ponds that we have here are probably about 9/10 of the overall site acreage. We have about a little over 850 acres, 888 acres, I believe, with roughly 100 acres that's land, and the rest would be water. We have these 3 ponds. The Neuse River is up there at the northeast. The larger pond and the one just above that are from surface runoff, whereas the other one close to the Neuse River, that's we use that for our effluent from our sewer treatment plant. And I just wanted to show you a few shots from around the site. Again, a good variety of a beautiful site, a lot of opportunities, a lot of elevation, surprisingly, in this site. This is the canal, and you can, on the lower left, you can kind of see the location of where this is on the peninsula. But this canal leads to the Neuse River, which also offers a unique opportunity for access to the Neuse. And just a variety of vegetation throughout the park. This is a wetland map. There are some wetlands on the site. A majority of the what I call the peninsula, the 88-acre area, a small portion of that does have some wetlands. We've planned around that. And this is our floodplain maps. There are some areas that are within the 100-year floodplain. We've recognized those and planned around that. And so what kind of park elements would we want to consider for this park? And this is primarily based upon the needs assessment from the public meetings and the public input we received. But we broke these down into special events such as outdoor performance area, trails. Again, that was one of the top priorities for from the public. Adventure activities. We wanted to consider amenities that may not be typical to a lot of our parks, to offer something different. And we got a lot of positive response that was favorable towards what we're calling adventure activities with ropes course, zip lining, bike pump course, skate park, and then a number of water-based opportunities that we could consider, whether it's boating, swim beach, fishing piers. This park offers a multitude of opportunities to consider, as well as our traditional day use activities, playgrounds, picnicking, community building, and our preservation. What do we want to conserve and take advantage of? And that offers opportunities as well. So our day use activities, we've focused that on the peninsula, where it's the largest area we have to work with. A lot of the other lands that that are surrounding the perimeter of the property, or dividing the ponds, which lend themselves more to trails, and you might have smaller elements such as picnic areas or benches, but we focus a lot of the day use activities on the 88-acre peninsula. Camping was also desired, and we felt like that might be more appropriate, separated from this area, so we considered that over to the left of the site. And this is our concept. We looked at a variety of options for the planning of the site and things that could be arranged in different locations, and we developed this, the plan you see with perimeter trails going around the lakes. There's about roughly 7 miles of a perimeter trail going around these ponds, which offers a good variety of trail to use. An evening probably is enough time to see all the trails. So this is a great opportunity. A lot of the trails are already in place that can be accessed through vehicles, so we feel like that's some low-hanging fruit to take advantage of. The 88 acres that we spent a lot of time evaluating and looking at different opportunities. One thing that we knew we'd have to have is good circulation. The primary road would come off Glen Burnie where the existing road is, but having a loop road that would allow us to take advantage of different opportunities of the site, to be able to have access areas. We felt like we should have not one large parking area, but parking areas that are strategically located to take advantage of various opportunities throughout the site. One major component that we're proposing is the outdoor performance area. This is located at the the upper portion of the park property. It takes advantage of the sun angles, as well as having views to the lakes. The lower portion of the property, we have a swim beach to the lower right, and I'll go into more detail of these areas. In the central lower portion is what we're calling the boathouse community building. In the central portion of the area, we've proposed having more of our adventure activities. And again, I'll blow these up and we can discuss these in more detail. This central portion I mentioned is centralized towards adventure recreation. Most of you are familiar with the zip lines and adventure ropes course. They've become a growing trend in recreational amenities. We feel like these elements would be not only a local attraction, but this could also create a regional attraction for communities across the eastern part of North Carolina. We're also proposing skateboard park, a pump bike course, climbing walls. We've got, of course, pedestrian circulation in and around here, which would offer opportunities for fitness stations. So pedestrian circulation was an important part of this, so we made sure that we connected all these areas with access. The outdoor performance area, again, would be connected with trails. We also have a spine road that leads off a spur, if you will, that connects to the lower portions of the amphitheater for access for outdoor performances, whether you're having equipment for those events or just ADA access. There's a beautiful portion of the property that overlooks the canal area just to the upper right, as well as there's opportunities to access the river, the Neuse River, through the canal area at this point. The entrance to the park is to the upper right. That's actually a two-way, not a one-way paved drive there, but it would divert to a one-way loop road. But where we have the swim beach, we would also have a common area, a common lawn that could be used for just informal recreational purposes, playgrounds. To the right of this, we'll have opportunities for boating, whether it's rentals or just public access where you could dock your boats, and then a Wibbit course. And I've got examples of these I'll follow up with. And to the left of that is our boathouse. And now we've got some examples. This would be a multi-purpose facility. We felt like the theme of this had a lot of water-based theme, so we felt like a boathouse might be appropriate, but it would serve as a number of elements, such as community building, gathering space, just a outdoor area, outdoor seating to overlook the activities, overlook the lake. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for that. Rental space for community events. Observation towers where we feel like this would be a great opportunity to look out over the lake, picnicking areas. So some considerations for the outdoor performance area. Site views was considered, or were important for this area. Sun angles. Also materials used for the amphitheater would be important. Make sure it's durable and considerate of the sun and the wind. Here are a few examples I want to share with you that some of our thoughts as far as what this facility could be. We're anticipating we plan for a 5,000 seat capacity that can be expanded over time as needed. But just want to share with you a few examples of orientation, what this could look like. Our bike trails, pedestrian trails, offer a variety of different types of trails. Some of these trails might be paved versus others may be granular based. Some would be wider than the others. It's important to have to use a variety of trails, I feel like, to offer different experiences. Surfaces would also be important to consider. Your primary routes would likely be wider than others to allow for multiple uses and not have reducing conflict with the users, as well as consideration of safety and accessibility. So here's some examples of the trails we're considering for Martin Marietta Park. As well as boardwalks. Boardwalks aren't just a way to get from point A to point B, but they also offer an opportunity for different user experiences. We've got these shown in some of the wetland areas where we feel like environmental education could be an important component of the park. Adventure activities, there's again a variety of amenities we're proposing. Consideration of this would be, of course, safety, accessibility, and maintenance. But we feel like this might be, again, an opportunity to attract a number of users on more of a regional base versus a local base. And again, another example, a ropes course. Again, these are growing in popularity as well. Rock climbing walls, BMX bike course, skateboard park, as well as camping. There may be some users who want to come out more than just a day, and then they may travel, a couple hours away. And so we felt like, if there's opportunities for camping, we need to consider those as for those that want to stay for a longer period of time, more than just a day. A large variety of water-based recreational opportunities. Again, staffing, maintenance, location are all important to consider. Water quality as well. Different types of, we had a wide variety of participants at our public meetings who wanted a variety of different types of uses. Some wanted a small sailboating club. Others were, as you can imagine, a majority wanted canoe kayak access, paddle boarding, pedal boats. All these, you have a multitude of opportunities. You have such a large body of water to consider, so we wanted to keep this open and broad, and then focus on specific areas and needs that we felt were appropriate. Accessibility was something we always want to consider. We have in the upper left is a ADA compliant canoe kayak launch. The Whibbit course. You may have seen these. I learned a lot about Whibbit here in the recent months, but this is a growing activity. It's very popular for those that have used it. It's kind of like an adventure course that's obviously more geared towards younger age participants, but I had a lot of older adults at our public meetings who would like to try it out as well. So it's a fun activity for users. Swim beach, a great number of participants desired to be out in the water. Fishing. So the day use activities, along with many of the other things that we discussed, were important. I think one element to consider is the relationships among the amenities, making sure they're compatible with each other. That's why we have our boathouse separate from the swim beach area. There may be separate activities that would merit having these facilities and amenities separate. Lighting, concessions, picnicking, all these things were considered in the overall layout and proposals we have for you. Playgrounds, again, the growing trend is more accessibility, and there's intergenerational activities that we also want to consider for playground amenities. So here are examples of fitness stations where we have proposed around the adventure trail. In the community building, again, we're calling this a boathouse, but it can be used for not only would we have boats that could be docked there, but there's opportunities for outdoor space around the building. We would like for the building to be vernacular to the area, to have some sense of more of a coastal experience, architecturally speaking. You may recognize this building as an example. And an interior space that could be multifunctional. Whether you have an indoor craft venue or a wedding banquet, there's informal space that can be used for a multitude of different functions. And picnic shelters, wildlife observation for the environments we're trying to preserve. Observation towers. There were at our public meetings, there was a large number of birders who participated that really are they mentioned that this area has a very diverse population of birds. So I went through this quickly. I will be glad to and hopeful that you'll have questions or comments concerning the overall plan. Got Jim Borey here with me. He's one of my associates, and he's worked with a number of large communities, most recently Newport News as city manager in Greenville, South Carolina. He's worked on a large number of projects of similar magnitude with regard to implementation that we could discuss, but I'll leave the floor with you.
What's the price tag?
Mm-hmm. I didn't hear you mention the mountains to the coast trail.
Mountain Sea Trail?
Yeah, that's incorporated.
Well, it is a consideration, actually, and I appreciate you bringing that up. The Neuse River, of course, is part of the paddle trail. And I feel like there's, and it's also designated on your bicycle pedestrian plan, coming through as part of a land trail through this park. So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for those users of the Mountains to Sea Trail, either through paddling or through walking or hiking or biking, that could see this as a destination, particularly with the canal that could open it up to an opportunity there. There's some, we've also discussed the opportunity to, you could travel in from boat via downtown to this park, which also offers an alternative mode of access to the park via boat. But that's a good point, Mayor.
Do you have a question?
Yes, what's the price tag?
The price tag? We've looked at various opportunities, looking at having some opportunities for consideration of in-house or looking at bidding out this, and it's in excess of $10 million currently. We're looking at various means of implementation as far as what pieces might go first. There's also a Part F grant that we've discussed as far as applying for in the coming weeks that could be used as an initial first phase for development. But we haven't, I guess to answer your question, till we finalize the plan, we'll be able to derive to a closer cost estimate.
In today's market versus 30 years ago, I remember Lawson Creek was a dump, and it didn't happen overnight. It sequentially happened over 20, 30, 40 years. So similarly, I would think that the city would involve itself somewhat, particularly in a conceptual design master plan, but that would be altered from time to time. I don't see the city getting in there, and I think there's concerns by some that I heard expressed the other night that this is going to change from a very natural area that's very populated with different animal species, that we're going to be very sensitive to the nursery area, estuary areas of the whole area proper, but incorporate in that walking trails and the tie into the mountains to the sea, along with many boaters through the years have gone up that canal and traversed those areas.
Yes, sir.
Probably to the chagrin of Martin Marietta, but that was something we did growing up. So again, I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but I think that if the city here, similarly to our earlier discussion, puts the skin in the game, that we are providing those leadership tools to for somebody to see the visionary where we can go with this. This total area is less than Lawson Creek if you take out the sensitive areas in the waterfront. So we do want to be smart about the way it is developed. But it's, in other words, answer to Johnny Ray's question, it probably is 10 million or better, but it will happen through private-public partnerships. And go ahead, Mr. Stevens.
Well, I was just, we've got grant opportunities. Obviously, part of he mentioned, I'm sure that we could apply for other grant opportunities, Bait Foundation, some of these others that we do. What's that?
It's Trillium.
Trillium. We could potentially request their services with the inclusive playground equipment items. I just saw an article today where the skateboarding group here locally are trying to put together a group for their movement. Perhaps they could do some fundraising and opportunities for us to partner with them for this skateboard park as part of a phase of this. I mean, I don't think this is hey, it's out there today, and 6 months from now we're going to spend $10 million and build it. I agree with the mayor. This is going to be a phased process of building. The question is really here in this presentation is the concept something that the board agrees with in essence, because the importance of us having a plan, a master plan, is critical for us to go to the next phase of getting a Part-F grant. And you will recall that through the donation of the Martin Marietta Park, we actually used a waiver form that the state allows you to do so to waive the donation as a part of your in-kind payment towards the match. In doing so, we've got that approved through the state with the Part-F folks. And when is the deadline, Foster, for the after? May 1st is the deadline for the Part-F grant. So if we're going to try to hit this year's funding cycle, then we wanted to get this before y'all to get comments, so that if we need to go make any adjustments, or if you had any questions or concerns about the process that we've gone through, we need to do any more. It sounds like we've had a very robust, in my opinion, robust participation of all the different groups and comments. But ultimately, this is going to be the board's decision with regards to the park. I mean, this master plan and everything moving forward. So.
How much are we looking?
Go ahead.
How much are we looking to get in the grant that's going to be written?
The maximum you can get in Part-F funds is $500,000.
Okay.
To say that they may back that down depending on how much funding is available and how many applications they get per year, that could happen. They could say $375,000 is your number, or whatever. But either way, $500,000 is the maximum that the Part-F funds program will allow you to get.
So that would be good for one of the first phases.
That's correct. So essentially, because we have the property that was donated to us has a value of that or more,
right,
automatically we could apply for $500,000 towards this project.
So is this something that the city would match? would this part have a grant, or just specifically?
In the future, we would have to if we want to get additional part of funds, but because we had the land donated, we're able to use that as our match on the first round because we've requested the waiver and received it.
Jim, I'm going to let Jim mention a few comments as far as funding and implementation.
Mayor, Alderman, it's great to be here. It's always a little bit eerie for me to be on the other side of the rail here, having spent 37 years in local government and city management. And
Yeah, I know the feeling.
We had that discussion.
I really enjoyed being part of the public input process. To have over more than 200 people, and it's good to see you again, Mayor, and Alderman Best, good to see you as well. So I've been involved in just lots of projects, dozens and dozens of large projects. Let me just give you an example. These projects really are long-term indeed. You're absolutely correct, Mayor. And they're also a partnership project with federal level, state level, and private entities as well. Let me just give you one example. When I was city manager in Greenville, South Carolina, we had a major convention center that we purchased from the private sector. We had $30 million we needed to come up to renovate that facility. The city ended up putting in $12 million, well less than half of that. $3 million from the federal government, $7 million from the state, $3 million through naming rights for the project, and other sources as well. These projects can be partnerships. For instance, in this project, we recognize that there's going to be some private interest that could come in and fund major recreational elements of this, a zip line or other projects which could be $1 million or more investment in and of itself and generate significant revenue. So there are a lot of private sector pieces. You saw the assembly area, the room, that could be a revenue generator for weddings. It's amazing now the venues that people are having for weddings, and this could be a spectacular venue. So we think there's private money, there's public money. I made a presentation in Virginia last week, and there are more than 10 federal sources that could be used for this type of project. There's an urban trails project, there's conservation areas, and so there's a lot of funds that could be pursued, and part of our commitment is to be here with you for that whole journey. This isn't just a plan that we've drawn up to make a pretty picture. This is something that we want to bring home to you, and we really want to have it be really a signature project for this city, that with your downtown can be just an attraction and a really significant economic generator for the city. In fact, we'd like to do a look at what this could generate for revenue and a look at what the markets may be as well, which is something we've had some conversation with the city manager about, because we think this could generate a tremendous amount of interest in tourism. It's interesting because last year my wife and I came to New Bern from Newport News just for a 3-day weekend because it was a cool place to be, and I wanted to introduce her to the city. Because of the history here, because of the things that you've done with it, it's really made a big difference. When the time I was in Greenville, South Carolina, I went there in 2004. Not many tourists visited Greenville, South Carolina, but today it's a very, very different place because of the investment and because of what's transpired during that time. And I think New Bern can really bring things up to another level, and this can be a major part of that. But it's a public-private effort and takes place over time.
So let me ask you a question, please. This project right now is just in the planning stage. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
Have you received any funding from anybody at this point?
We have not received any funds, but we can apply for, and if we get it, potentially $500,000 from the state through the Part F grant, because we had the donation of the property from Marietta for this park. So we have an opportunity to get $500,000 at no cost, no additional cost to the city.
But right at this point in time, there is no funds that's been received.
We have not received any, but we can't. Most of the grant opportunities that we would apply for, we're going to need a final plan for, and that's the reason why that's the reason why we've gone through the process, and we now have it before you today, is to present this to you because we need the plan in order for us, and the plan has, according to Part of rules, the plan has to be approved by the Board of Aldermen in order for you to submit it as part of an application.
Mr. Mark, I have a question. For the land that was donated, is it worth more than $500,000?
Yes, and to follow up on what I think you're going to ask is, no, you cannot. which
What,
is you
section
can't
it
use
off?
the additional funds that are available for a second phase of funding.
Okay, I was about to say.
I think
Mark
one
is right.
thing that
Good
is
city
He is
manager.
correct.
so important about your master plan is that the board could, get a little too motivated and put the wrong thing at the wrong place, and then something bigger could come up, and then we've precluded that opportunity. And I think your master plan makes us we've done the right thing. We've got a good check and balance, that we have the amphitheater in a good location. And I don't think from what I see, I don't see where we're going to shake our heads 10 years later that we put the wrong improvement somewhere. Because I think this lays out well with the contour of the land and the mitigation that you're going to have to go through with the water quality folks and stuff like that. I think you've done a good job.
And we've had multiple conversations with the various state agencies on, as far as water quality and DOT and all those elements that we need to consider. This plan is flexible. There's going to be new trends 10 years from now that we haven't seen yet. So we want to make sure that this is flexible. Some of the things that are necessary for a park to function, such as access, public restrooms, things like that we need, part of the infrastructure that you'd want to consider as an initial phase in first phase or second phase. But again, as you were alluding to, this could be a phased approach as opportunities arise with the public private relationships there. I think there'll be a multitude of opportunities. And some of, as I mentioned before, things like the trails, the network of trails. A lot of these it would take a lot of work to have those in place fairly soon, that I think would be important to take advantage of. I was mentioning last week, for a community to go in and develop and construct a pond for water-based recreation, what kind of investment that would take, a huge investment. You've got water here that is accessible from with little effort to have access for boating, for fishing. A number of those things, I feel like, particularly with those public agencies where funding is available, that we would want to try to take advantage of. There's a lot of other opportunities other than Part F.
I think it's a very elastic plan. As it might be a 10 or 20 year phase out, if the excitement of the public changes and they have a particular something else that comes up that's vogue, you're not limited. And I think that was some concern I saw the other night at the public hearing. I think some folks thought this was just kind of cast in stone, that this is what was going to happen. And I'm just going to give my prediction. I would say maybe 50 to 60% of that will happen, but I think the market itself and the grassroots input will probably morph that where it's going to go. With that, have you seen that before? And of course, a lot of this is going to be driven by private investment and grants, and obviously none of that's going to happen unless we are doing it smartly with a plan of action.
What you really, Mayor and Alderman, what you really want is a vision, and that overall vision will guide it going forward. But I think you're right. It will be organic to a degree because the market's going to respond to things which are going to be driven by private investment and other pieces of that. So I think that probably will change over time. But you get that basic vision and the elements that you adopt, and that will be the guiding force behind it as it changes over time and as it evolves and as you get investment and as you find the grants that make things work.
I have a question. I'm
No,
sorry.
you go ahead.
Mayor? I understand, Mr. Stevens, we got to have a plan before we can move forward to even get the Part F grant. I understand all that. But what I'm really concerned about is what type of liability is this park going to create for the city? Have anybody even thought about that?
Yeah, it's going to be like Union Point and Lawson Creek. It's a nuisance item, you might say, from a liability standpoint.
I will tell you, I will give you the answer that Scott always gives me is anybody can be sued for anything at any time. Okay. So regardless, I mean, we're anything can happen, and we could potentially, somebody could stub their toe over here on a brick and sue us if they wanted to, or claim it was our fault and negligence or whatever. So I really wouldn't worry about too much of the liability issues as much as anything.
Go ahead, sir.
Alderman, what about Alderman and Alderman Best? In Newport News, we have the second or third largest park in the United States. And a large water body, recreation, a lot of similarities to this. The golf course, in the 4 years I was there wasn't one lawsuit. And I don't remember ever it being an issue over the 50 years that park has been there. So yes, there's issues. I don't think it's a really concern.
Well, my main concern was because of the zip line.
So if there's a very valid point. If there's a zip line, I would suspect this could end up being a private operation.
Yeah.
And they would have to be made liable for that as well. So
So you
as
answered
we
my
go
question.
forward, as you go forward, certainly protecting the city in the town and all the liabilities that could be there would be paramount in the effort. And I know that the city manager and city attorney will protect that.
Yeah. Anytime we have that, and I agree with what they're saying there, this is probably an operation that may go through some agreement or understanding with a private company. Anytime we have that in that agreement, we would indemnify ourselves from liability. However, as I said, anybody can be sued for anything at any time. So regardless of whether we're indemnified, someone could potentially still try to sue us, which we would have to defend.
Mark, excuse me. I've been waiting so long to ask a question, I forgot to answer the question. But I do remember mine for years. You talked earlier about the zip line being able to generate revenue. And I was kind of surprised that I did not hear about the outdoor performance stage actually generating revenue. Wouldn't that be one of the biggest areas to generate revenue?
It could, not only from just the event, but also from heads and beds, from the local standpoint of people coming to downtown to eat, then to go to an outdoor performance. So there's a lot of what I call the hidden revenue that we may not recognize in ticket sales, but also in concessions. There's a number of different ways to evaluate that, and that's what Jim was alluding to, a study to evaluate what's the right capacity. Is it 5,000 seat? Is it
I mean, personally, just from the little bit of research that I've been involved in with this, you got to have a minimum of 5,000 seating.
Correct.
Yeah, to be able to generate any concerts or to get some of the bands in here that you might they might be interested in, they're going to want that kind of seating. In this outdoor performance area, did you have provisions in here for covered seating and permanent seating, or is it all kind of on the hill type?
Initially, we were considering an open lawn, and this could be a phased approach also, is having obviously a covered amphitheater, but then as you get that in place and get more venues and more opportunities to phase in potential for covered seating, for fixed seating. So there's opportunities for that to expand and be enhanced as you move forward.
Well, the only conversation I've had with anyone whatsoever concerning this park was if we do the outdoor performance stage, and this gentleman I was talking to goes, I think it's in Cary, called Coco or something like that. He encouraged us maybe to go up there and look at theirs, but he also encouraged us to have the covered seating, because the people, some of the groups that you bring in and the people, that's where he wants to sit, and that's where, I've only been to a couple of concerts in the past 20 years, and I've always been into the covered seating part of it myself. I'm too old to sit on the hill.
Another thing that can happen too is you can have a stepped lawn
Right, yeah.
where you actually do sit on areas, and then any place where people bring in chairs, in addition to what could be some covered area that may be reserved areas. So there's ways.
I agree with that. I agree that bring your lawn chair or bring your blanket or something like that. Where a majority of the people would sit. But I think it would be wise for us to also really think about having some covered VIP
there's
type
definitely
seating.
some type
Right.
of shade sale or something.
Sure. And then my other question is have you provided enough parking here for a 5,000?
That's a good question, and we spent a lot of time discussing that. we felt like from an environmental standpoint and just from also cost to provide the parking necessary for 5,000 people. So we've looked at opportunities. We've got quite ample, for instance, the Walmart parking lot that gets used is at capacity once a year on Friday after Thanksgiving. What we've evaluated this, and we have quite a number of spaces provided that are fixed paving spaces, parking spaces, if you will, and then at the end of the canal, if you will, to the right of that on our plan, we have that designated as overflow parking. So when you have those 6, 7 events that are major events at this park for outdoor performance area, we would have that as overflow with parking.
The advantage that an amphitheater, a venue like this has is people don't come as individuals. They come at least generally 2, 3, or more in a car. So it really helps out. And there's enough studies that that's a very knowable fact.
Yeah, I'm sure that's...
and there is enough amphitheaters around the country that there's a lot of experience. So that's a very, very knowable number.
And now I just remembered my first question, Mark. I understand you need a concept or a site plan to apply for these grants, but this doesn't mean that this one is set in stone. Is that correct?
No, it's the fluidity of this plan is expected.
Okay.
And that will happen through bringing it back before the board to approve modifications to the recreation master plan to include Marietta Park. But we do, in concept, have to have a master plan that has to be approved for us to go through the application process.
But to approve this so Foster can move on with the application, even if we get the grant, which I'm sure Foster will write it in such a way that we will, that we would be able to change things about the plan
if we needed to, yes.
Okay.
At that point, we would modify it.
I'm good with it.
For the amphitheater, or the parking and stuff like that, was this based on 5,000 seats already, or?
The paid parking that we have shown on the plan would not be adequate for a 5,000 seat event. It's designed more of your typical day use area. You're looking at in excess of 1,000 parking spaces for a 5,000 seat amphitheater.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the canal, to the right of that, we propose that overflow parking that would be able to manage that big event.
Right. I'm from New York, so in Saratoga we have SPAC, and so with Saratoga Performing Arts Center, and so we have the amphitheater. And what they did for Mr. Astor's question is we had the stage, and then you did have the covering, where basically that's VIP in regards to sales tickets, and then it gradually went out. But I mean, kind of set like this, I walked like miles just to get there. So there's that partnership where you can develop if someone's in a golf cart, because I see you have a lot of different spots throughout the whole map that can also help with parking. So I believe that'd be great too.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of that parking right up close would have to be designated as handicap parking for one.
There'll be handicap parking in every parking area we have shown, but to your comment, there will be the parking spaces closest to the amphitheater would be designated as handicap.
Well, isn't there room? I mean, it looks like there might be room beside each one of those parking lots to.
There could be some overflow parking there. Yes, sir.
What is the grayish part? Is that land or water?
Yes.
Okay.
That's part of your aerial photography where it's just open meadow. It's not being developed currently.
Okay. And then bathrooms.
Right.
Did you just put bathrooms on here or no?
There would be, yes. We have 6 different locations of bathroom comfort facilities that would be located in and around the park. But and that's one of the great things about this venue that we had as a shared vision is if there's a big concert venue and you're coming from Raleigh, you could come early in the day and spend all day at the park doing a variety of renting boats, taking your children on a zip line, but also that evening having a concert venue where you're already there. And I think that's a unique opportunity that we don't see often in facilities such as this.
And this would probably be the only outdoor performance theater east of Raleigh, is there? Do you know of any others? I know
There's
Walnut Creek's
a
about
small one in Wilmington, there's a small one in Greenville, but as far as one of this significance and size, probably not too many of them.
Yeah,
I'm
I would,
not aware of any.
and if we're going to do this, I'm all in favor of just doing it to start with at 5,000 capacity, because that's what it's going to take to get to make money.
I mean, we want to be realistic of what the expectations are with the board. I mean, I would love it if we had a very large company want to come in and say, you know what, we recognize the same thing that you just mentioned there. We want Verizon or whoever wants to come in and sponsor a larger facility. We would love that.
Oh, yeah.
I sure would bring that to you in a heartbeat at your next board meeting if that happened. But
And I'd be willing to bet you there's someone out there that's just waiting to make that
it's quite possible.
I mean,
For this, will this be gated for, closed at certain times? Like, how you go to the beach, you can get access, especially for some of the...
It will have, I'm sure, operational hours very similar to what we have at maybe Lawson Creek Park. I think it closed at 11. Is that correct, Foster?
Oh,
Yes. That's something that we establish further down the road. It may depend that certain portions of it stay open earlier or later than others. It may be that we shut down the trails at some point and leave the inner workings of the recreational opportunities available. Just because it's such a large street. I mean, you figure 7 miles around or that one lake is almost 3 miles around. So I mean, to walk or bike a 3 mile location is going to take you a good while. So
I just like the idea of what he was saying, as if we move forward with the whole process. One thing that you can really implement is the trails. I mean, that seems like it might be the easiest where you're getting the flow of it. So
I agree. The trails are there. I've been on them.
And that is,
you can just in a couple of months.
That's something where we're talking about, low hanging fruit.
Right.
We can knock off the list real quick. That could be part of this first initial funding phase.
Right.
We need, obviously, if we're going to provide recreational amenities out there, we need to provide a comfort station. So that's something we're going to have to look at. You need somewhere to use the bathroom. It may be that we do something like that. We're going to need parking facilities if we're going to do it, because at that point we're having to start meeting zoning requirements.
Right.
So things like that we're going to work through with this first phase of funding as far as grant opportunities.
Mark, how do we go about letting people know that this amphitheater would be an opportunity for them? I mean, have you got something in mind on how to...
we would RFP something that is this significant. We would submit that out, look at all kinds of opportunities. We'd send that out for RFPs, I'm sure.
Well, I might suggest that when you do that, you can entice the private sector by doing some initial work to look at the market. I think to show what we can know by where the amphitheaters are, what revenue generation might happen. So some initial study up front to help attract not only zip line but amphitheater and others probably would be worth your investment.
Yeah, well, I would love to see the trails open as quickly as possible, but I'd like to see that amphitheater open up tomorrow. It's something that would be big in New Bern. I think it's a great opportunity for us. So I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do you need a motion, Mark? Does it go forward with this for the grant purposes, or do you just need a...
What do you want today, Foster?
We're actually going to present this at the first meeting in April formally for the...
That give you plenty of time.
This was kind of an input opportunity for the board if they had any kind of inside input, whatever. Our plan was to bring that, as Foster said, to the first meeting in April where you would formally adopt it. That way it's noticed and the community at that point would have an opportunity to see the agenda, what we're requesting to do, and that kind of stuff. So,
great.
One of the obviously we're presenting a fairly close completion of the master plan. And we wanted to present this to see if there were, if you were concurred with what we have, or if there's something that we didn't include, or something that you don't like about the plan. And once we feel comfortable with that, then we would come back to you and say, well, we feel more aligned to, for a Part F grant application, we feel like trails, a fishing pier or something like that. What might be your suggestion
I would just
for
caution
initial
the board
phase?
that I think all of us have individual items we would like to see there. I certainly do, and I certainly have my own vision. But at the same time, I think it's so important that if we all want better recreation for our citizens and a healthier environment, that I think this is the conceptual idea that we need to go forth with, and we can always alter it at a future time as citizen input and such happens.
And I will say, and I want to commend these guys because they have done a fantastic job with regards to community outreach. And y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but 800 and some people filling out surveys and 215 or so showing up for the event that we had at the mall, 115 at the one we had.
Right. You've had excellent participation for the.
And I think we all want to be attentive and concerned with the concerns that were expressed at the meeting, that you're well aware of those, and I think we want to be respectful and equally concerned the environmental end of it. At some future point, I'm really excited about that tying into the Mountains to the Sea Trail, that we've already expanded that into downtown area. So, a multi-purpose sidewalk that gets people walking and riding bikes out there to that park, and with safety crossovers and things like that. That's what we want to do, but that's way up the road.
Well, and I agree with you. Having some type of multi-use trail connection from downtown to the park over time would be wonderful.
I say that because we need your help and others' help in procuring those safe, what did you get, Johnny Ray?
Safe routes to schools.
Safe routes to schools. I mean, that's not necessarily that one, but the discretionary funds that anybody from the governor to the lieutenant governor on down might have, that we can get and invest in this project with us for the betterment of all of our citizens.
And Foster, I think you probably should keep in the back of your mind that we need to look at additional parking, because I really would like to see this thing go to a minimum of 5,000, and with possibility of increasing it, because I think it's going to be great. I mean, I think it's going to be well received, and you're going to have people from all over coming to New Bern to listen to concerts.
Absolutely. One of the things that was mentioned at the meeting was the water quality. We had some preliminary reports or some tests done, and it is safe to swim at and use. So I think that was one of those things that was discussed that we were going to follow up on.
And you also indicated that we would probably have canoeing and electric. We would not have gas.
We are not proposing gas motorized boats there for a few reasons. One is the noise. The other is just the potential for water quality. Any kind of leaks or things like that adds to diminished, or not diminished, but contamination.
Can you please show me where is the entrance and exit to this park?
Okay, let me go back a slide. I apologize. Okay, this area, right here is the overall park. Glen Burnie Road is to the far right, and actually the entrance is right across the street from the DOT facility. Okay. And it just above the large pond is where the entrance would be, and that would directly take you to the large 88-acre day use area.
So the bottom right is our public works facility.
Mm-hmm.
And if you follow the road straight up where that 90-degree turn to the left is, that's Glen Burnie.
Over there by Yancey's, I think it is, Yancey Concrete Company.
You know where all that water that you were talking about?
Mm-hmm.
It's just past there on the left. As soon as you cross the railroad tracks heading towards Hatteras, when you pass that pond or that lake that's on your left, the entrance is right there.
There's a mini storage right there, and it's right there at the main store.
That's a good question though. Is it Yancey Asphalt, or the asphalt company still there?
Yeah, they still own it. Well,
I don't think it's in operation.
Yancey's a separate property, but then you also have Barn Hill that owns the other portion.
Right, correct.
And that's the large piece that you see that's adjacent to where he identified the overflow parking.
I would like to thank Alderman Asker for having, when you had your statewide drill there that time, that really, when I went out there and there was quite a few folks parking, that really kind of opened my eyes. And you were out there kind of where that amphitheater is, where you were set up.
Mm-hmm.
That really kind of opened my eyes to that potential. And why don't you tell folks about what you did out there that time? Yeah.
Oh, well, we have one of the members of the fire department that's on the state aerial rescue team that's and we just had the state had a large training session down here, and we had people from all over the state driving onto and in and around the property, had landed helicopters out there and stuff for the training session.
I need to get a tour of it because I've never been.
No, you need to.
I'm not going in there by myself. I need to be on a bus or something. I'll be scared.
So, I think it's great.
Yeah, let's, you want some action, or you're gonna
Unless-
make the presentation?
Yeah, unless the board has any
at the
specific
April
changes,
meeting.
we'll bring this to you at the first meeting in April.
Right.
The only other thing is I have a question. Sabrina had to leave, so she asked me to ask this question, and it's directed to Foster more than anything. I think it's, she says, will you ask about the possibility of any upgrades at Glen Burnie Park, and what is the future of Glen Burnie Park? Now we're going to have two large parks fairly close together. You have any thoughts about any upgrades and what the future may be for Glen Burnie Park?
With Glen Burnie Park, we don't really see doing anything to that other than adding some walking trails to it. It's pretty much developed out, and adding too many more things in there would make it congested. Right now it's got picnic shelters, it's got an existing dog park, it's got a disc golf course, it's got a lot of nice views, it's got a playground, so adding more would congest that thing. There really isn't a lot of room to be able to add more parking without destroying some of the beauty of the park, so we don't anticipate adding anything else.
A lot of people that go out there, they recognize, they see a lot of open space, but in reality, that's the disc golf course.
Sure.
So there's
Which I was kind of surprised wasn't on this list.
Yeah, I think they got. I mean, the one right down the road. That's a really nice one, and to be honest with you, it's used for a lot of tournaments that happen with regards to the disc golf crowd here in North Carolina. And actually, they had a national one here a couple years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
And I think actually, when we were going through the survey part, I think Mark or Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but there were 4 folks that mentioned something about disc golf on this site. So, and we really looked at what the top vote getters were for the amenities for this park.
At just some point, would you? I think she's in the process of having a grandbaby. So, at some point, maybe tomorrow, something like that. If you'd give her a call and just explain that to her as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, anything else on the presentation? Okay, what else is there to come before this board today, Mr. Steve?
That is all we have, sir.
Adjournment's the next thing.
I'll
make a motion.
I second it.
Motion and second, any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye. All opposed, the same.
Aye.
Meeting is concluded.